part of the Conservative coalition, which is what it really is, the moderates, the One Nation. The harder you go on immigration, on other issues, you will end up freezing somebody out. Or if you go more to the mainstream, you will possibly lose more voters to reform. So I think it is a bit of a catch-22 situation. You cannot be all things to all people. And I think the one thing that you will hear a lot from Conservative MPs and spokespeople is Tees Valley. That will be the buzzword, and that will be a protective shield for the Prime Minister if that is retained, and that will last for a while. But MPs will still be quite nervous, because looking at the underlying results on the local elections, what it means for them in the upcoming general election, that's what will be of concern for them. And they will also remember that, you know, Ben Houchen has campaigned without really even mentioning the Prime Minister or the government, and in fact has invoked Boris to try and help him. So all of this, I'm afraid, does not bode well.
Mo Hussein, thank you very much indeed for joining us and for your patience in hanging on. It just makes me think of a minister said to me today, there are lots of places where panic could come. So let's see where we are by the end of play on Saturday. We can bring you a result though. South Tyneside Council has been held by the Labour Party. You can see there 28 seats, the number they needed for a majority, but it's something really interesting, 15 being taken by independents and 11 seats to the Greens. Now, we knew the Greens were doing well, taking some off Labour there, but look at that, Labour losing 10, independents gaining 9 and Greens gaining 2, Tories losing 1. So we'll try to get to the bottom of what's gone on there in South Tyneside, but quite a dramatic shift around there. So that will be interesting. We'll try to get to the bottom of that in the next little while after the news. I'm going to say welcome to Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, who's just joined us in the studio. Nice to have you with us. Jonathan Reynolds is still here, and also Sarah Olney from the Liberal Democrats. We'll be talking to you in a few minutes' time. Let's tell you where things have got to in terms of the total tally on our giant tower. Labour have 49, they have gained 1. The Conservatives 19, losing 15. Lib Dem 16, gaining 1. Independents there, look, 14, going up as they did in South Tyneside, and the Greens gaining 4 so far to take them to 7. So things starting to come in, an interesting picture starting to shake up. We will be back with you in a couple of minutes after the news with Virginie Vajanathan.
Thanks, Laura. The first results are being declared in the local elections in parts of England in the last major test of public opinion before the general election. Labour have retained control of councils in Sunderland, Newcastle, South Tyneside and Chorley. The Conservatives said they're expecting a difficult evening, but have held on to control of Broxbourne. Counting's also underway for the parliamentary by-election in Blackpool South, and results are expected overnight from around a third of councils involved. With more, here's our political correspondent, Damien Grammaticus.
Up for grabs in these elections, 2,500 council seats, 11 mayoral jobs, and here in Blackpool South, 1 Westminster seat. It's one of the consequential battles tonight. Labour hopeful they can take it off the Conservatives.
Well, the first result we'll look for is the Blackpool by-election, which is the only result where Rishi Sunak and the government are really on the ballot paper. And if we can gain that, that will show real progress on the way to the coming general election.
And this is another place Labour say they're making progress. Hartlepool, controlled by the Conservatives, wresting it back would be symbolic for Labour. Tories are hoping the mayoral vote, which isn't being counted tonight, will be different. And Labour have other targets too. Rushmoor in Hampshire, a southern Conservative council. The Conservative minister here at the count, his party braced for losses of seats won back when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister.
The last time most of these seats were fought was in 2021, where we had effectively a vaccine bounce as we rolled out the COVID vaccine. That was our best set of local elections since 2008. So that's a very high base. So compared to that, it is going to be difficult to achieve on that.
In Hull, an alarm and an evacuation. Whether Conservatives think these elections signal trouble ahead for them will depend on the scale of any losses. In Stockport, where they're counting in a car park, Liberal Democrats could make gains from Labour. But what they're most focused on are the places they face off with Conservatives.
Across the country, we've heard that people are absolutely fed up of the Conservatives. And across the blue wall, lifelong Conservatives are switching to the Liberal Democrats. So we're very optimistic. People want to cast a verdict on the Conservatives' appalling record on the NHS and care, on the fact they've allowed the water companies to pump their sewage into our rivers, and the cost of living crisis.
In Grimsby, Conservatives are facing a tough night too. They've controlled North East Lincolnshire Council since 2019 and may see support eroding here. It's exactly the sort of place Labour will be targeting at the general election. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News.
In other news, John Swinney looks set to become Scotland's next First Minister after his main potential rival, Kate Forbes, said she wouldn't be standing for the leadership of the SNP. Instead, she's given him her support. Mr Swinney's the only candidate to put himself forward, but nominations are open until next week. He said the SNP was not as cohesive as it should be and pledged to create a modern, diverse and dynamic Scotland. A man's appeared in court charged with the murder of the schoolboy Daniel Anjoran in North East London. Daniel, who was 14, was on his way to school when he was fatally stabbed in Hainault on Tuesday. Marcus Monzo, who's 36, also faces several other charges, including 2 counts of attempted murder. To the US, and President Biden has urged pro-Palestinian protesters on university campuses to uphold the rule of law. There have been further clashes between police and demonstrators in a number of cities, including Portland in Oregon and Washington, D.C. Earlier, riot police dismantled a camp at the University of California in Los Angeles. The protests against the war in Gaza have spread to around 50 campuses, with more than 2,000 people arrested across the US in the past fortnight. The Foreign Secretaries met with President Zelensky in Kyiv to discuss the military equipment being sent to Ukraine by the UK. Lord Cameron said it would include precision-guided bombs and air defence missiles, which could be used by Ukraine against targets inside Russia.
In terms of what the Ukrainians do, in our view, it is their decision about how to use these weapons. They're defending their country. They were illegally invaded by Putin, and they must take those steps. We don't discuss any caveats that we put on those things, but let's be absolutely clear. Russia has launched an attack into Ukraine, and Ukraine absolutely has the right to strike back at Russia.
Lord Cameron there. Now, a hydroelectric dam has collapsed in southern Brazil after days of heavy rains, which have killed at least 31 people. At least 60 people are missing and 15,000 have been forced to leave their homes since those storms began on Saturday. Dozens of cities and towns have been flooded across the state of Rio Grande do Sul. The extreme weather is being caused by a rare combination of hotter than average temperatures, high humidity, as well as strong winds. Well, a reminder that you can follow all of the election results overnight over on the BBC News website or on the app. You can also see who's won and where using our postcode checker, which is at bbc.co.uk/news or on the app. Now it's time to return to Laura and the team and Elections 2024.
Warm welcome back to Election Night 2024 on the BBC. We will be with you through till 6 a.m. as results start to come through the night. Let's show you the tally so far. Not that many results in, but they are still interesting to pick over. You can see there that the Conservatives have lost 18 seats so far. Labour have gained 4 and the Liberal Democrats have gained 1. So a small number of results at this stage of the night, but we are seeing a share at the changing, and we've been talking about it a lot. It seems it might be kind of status quo where the big parties were since this time last year. But remember, we're looking at the last time these seats were fought back in 2021 too. So there are lots of comparisons, lots of complexities, lots of different kinds of races, councils, mayorals, and also a by-election. Blackpool South, we can show you the scene there, where they are now finally counting the votes after taking rather a long time to verify them, but there they've now got fully underway. And that race is important because a Conservative former MP left in disgrace. Labour believes that they will win that Westminster seat tonight. The battle there that's really shaping up, maybe between the Conservatives and the Reform Party, which came out of the remains of the Brexit Party, and that battle there for second place. So that's a really interesting contest, and we'll be there soon. Let's show you the scene in Plymouth. Plymouth Labour gained last year after splits in the Tory group. Interesting because that's likely to be a very hard-fought area when it comes to the general election. The Veterans Minister, Johnny Mercer, has his seat there. The other seat held by Luke Pollard, a shadow Defence Minister. So the Tories may well be expecting heavy losses in Plymouth down in the southwest. Let's show you then counting starting to go on in Exeter. Look at all of those people who've been working so hard pounding the pavements now tonight, standing looking anxious at what the next few hours will bring. Let's then take a breath and check in with John Curtice about what we can conclude, if very much, at this stage in the night. And John, just before we hear from you, I want to show people the vote share change so far that we've got since 2021, and then we'll just keep that up on the screen as we chat. Look at that. Conservatives down by 12% since 2021, when they had a very good year for a government in local election results, and Labour up 5%. So Labour had a terrible year in 2021. They lost the Hartlepool by-election, and our figures so far are suggesting they're only up 5% on that point. When we then look at the change since last year, when the Tories had a gruesome night, I think it can only be described as that, and Labour did pretty well. You can see the change since last year in the vote share is 0.2% up by Labour, so only a tiny fraction. The Tories down 2%, and Lib Dem's down by 3%, Greens up by 2%, and the Reform Party, we've already been mentioning, up by 3% too. So it's a really interesting context for that, even at 12 minutes past 2 in the morning. John, what do you make of those kinds of numbers?
Well, we are, of course, endlessly fixated by the battle between Conservative and Labour. And we've been constantly saying that the Labour lead over the Conservatives has been consistently around 20 points in the opinion polls. What, however, we've also not noticed about the national opinion polls is that they've been pointing for quite a while to around 1 in 3 people saying none of the above. Green, Reform, whatever. And to that extent, at least, we should remember that neither Conservative nor Labour are necessarily dominating the views of their elections. Well, now, we come to these local elections. And what do we find, at least in terms of early headlines? Reform, 15%. And clearly doing the damage to the Conservatives where they are standing. And it's probably to the Conservatives' good fortune that Reform are only fighting 1 in 6 of the wards. The Greens, some spectacular gains, particularly in Newcastle. And you can see their vote up since last year, and they may be heading for their best performance yet in English local elections. And indeed, if you look in terms of gains and losses, well, when I last looked a moment or two ago, the Greens were up 4 and Labour were up 4. And actually, it was independents who've made most gains. So these early results, at least, and we'll see what the pattern comes out later on, but it is a kind of reminder that particularly, of course, in local elections, but it's also there in the national polls. British politics isn't just about the battle between Labour and Conservative. There are lots of other battles going on as well. Now, all of that said, the change since 2023, it's not that great so far. If you actually, as you strip out the impact of Reform on the Conservatives, particularly in Sunderland, we look at the moment to be heading for something pretty similar to the local election results last year, at least so far as Labour and the Conservatives are concerned, and the gap between them. And that, of course, is what the opinion polls have been saying about the last 12 months, that so far as the two big parties are concerned, nothing much has changed, which perhaps again helps to explain why the interesting, intriguing, and in some senses more headline-grabbing results so far, at least, have been occurring elsewhere.
And in terms of the relationship between local elections and general elections and the role of the smaller parties, John, how do you describe that connection? Because they're both connected and also unconnected. You know, smaller parties tend to do better at local elections, but we can, or how much can we read across into the likely results, given that this is a general election year, which does make it different to your standard local election year?
Oh, look, I mean, we know the Liberal Democrats do better in local elections than they do in a general election. This is also true of the Greens. There's a question mark about whether or not this will or will not be true of reform. And of course, independents, you know, have had something revival in local government, and we are seeing that also tonight. So to that extent, at least, you know, there certainly isn't a straight read across. But I think certainly one of the lessons tonight is that yes, there is a battle between Reform and the Conservatives for those what we might broadly call the right of British politics. We kind of knew that from the national polls. I think we've also learnt tonight there is also potentially a battle between Labour and the Greens for those whom we might broadly regard as being on the progressive or on the left end of the spectrum. And perhaps particularly this is an issue amongst younger people, particularly in university towns, perhaps also amongst some of the Muslim communities. And certainly Labour do, it's not consistent everywhere, but there are certainly a number of wards with very strong Muslim folk around where Labour have actually done quite badly. Now, so therefore there will be a challenge to both Conservative and Labour over the course of the next months, trying to squeeze, as it were, those ideologically relatively close competitors who are much smaller, but whose votes could still potentially have an impact on Conservative and Labour's abilities to win seats.
John, thanks for now. We'll be back with you later. We can give you a couple of results in the last few minutes. Colchester Council in Essex, that still doesn't belong to any one party. None of them have managed to grab it for themselves, so that's still in no overall control. And as Bridget Phillipson told us a while ago now, Labour has indeed taken control of Hartlepool Council. There's official confirmation of that now. The count is complete. And there is the list of what we know so far. So there you are. Colchester is still a hung council. Hartlepool is Labour. Gateshead also still held by Labour. No surprise there. Eastleigh held by the Liberal Democrats. That's really one of their strongholds now, the area around Bournemouth. Newcastle has been held by Labour, although as we've been talking about with John, there are some wards going to the smaller parties. And there you can see pictures in Blackpool South of Richard Tice, the Reform leader. I'm not sure if he looks happy or full of anticipation, but he's looking at something very carefully on his press. Oh, laughing away. He's just, I don't know if he was looking at a funny post on social media or if he was looking at some of the party sums, just shaking hands with a supporter there. So Blackpool South, where a lot of the action will be tonight, and we will be there as soon as we've got any news to bring you of what might happen next. But Richard Tice, I'm sure we'll also try to speak to him a bit later in the night, the Reform leader. But just to go back to those councils coming through, Labour holding Newcastle, Labour holding Ipswich 2, Labour holding South Tyneside, where we were talking about just a couple of minutes ago. I can tell you the problem in South Tyneside that's got so many independent votes is the bins. There have been no bin collections today. There's been a bin dispute going on there, and we know how much people quite rightly care about their bins. So Labour's held South Tyneside but lost lots of seats to independents. Last few, just to show you there, Chorley in Lancashire held by the Labour Party, Rochford in Essex, no overall control. Sunderland held by Labour, and Broxbourne, which was our first result of the night, true blue Tories, and they held on. In a second, I'm going to bring in Reeta, but Chris, just a brief word.
Just a quick tip, but hearing from Labour sources that they think they are going to gain Thurrock in Essex. That was under no overall control. They think that they are going to gain that, and they are saying that this is the kind of place that they need to win to gain a majority in a general election. So they're doing that thing of copying across from what they seem to be claiming as progress there to a seat that they would need to do well in the general election.
And maybe we'll talk about that a bit more in a second. Labour have already taken 5 seats there, and they were only short by 6, so that would be a real victory for Labour that they would definitely want to emphasise to us all as we listen as the night goes on. But let's look at what happened in Hartlepool, where Labour is also very happy to claim a victory. Worth remembering that was held for a long time by the party, Peter Manelson's old stamping ground, of course. But Reeta, what's going on behind the numbers?
Well, here it is. It's a big win for Labour. They have been predicting it for a fair few hours now, but here is the absolute confirmation. As you can see, all the seats are counted, and they have got 24 seats here, the Conservatives and the Independents on 6. And this used to be a Labour council back in 2018, and then it went into no overall control from 2019 onwards. And they've gained a fair few seats, as I can show you now. They've gained 8 seats. The Conservatives have lost 6 and Independents have lost 2. So this is going to be a real boost for Labour and go some way to lancing that boil of that by-election loss that they suffered to the Conservatives with the House of Commons seat back in 2021. So that is Hartlepool. And let me just show you where we stand in terms of the state of the parties. So Labour has gained 14 councillors. The Conservatives have lost 28. So they've lost more councillors than they've gained. The night is still young, it's true, but, you know, that's not looking great for them, is it? Lib Dems have picked up 1, the Independents have picked up 9, and the Greens, who, as I was saying, appear to be having a good night of it, have picked up 4. Laura.
Reeta, thank you very much indeed. Well, Mark Harper, let's talk firstly to you. So it sounds like you've lost Thurrock. Labour on the ground is calling it for them as, again, exactly the kind of place that they need if they're going to form a majority at the next general election. You've also lost Hartlepool. What is your take on what's happening tonight? How worried are you?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to comment on results until we've actually had them declared.
OK, well, we've just had Hartlepool.
Yeah,
okay.
So,
yep.
Look, I go back to what I said in the clip that you played in the news bulletin. It depends on what you compare it to. If you compare it to which your seat calculator does the last time, most of the councils, the mayoral contests that are up, which we're not going to get any of those tonight, and the Police and Crime Commissioner elections, most of which I think are coming tomorrow. Last time they were all fought was in 2021. That was a very unusual thing. We had the vaccine bounce post-pandemic, where it was a cross-government effort. We were fastest in the world at rolling that out, and I think independent commentators think that had a really big impact on what was our best set of election results then since 2008. So that's a very high base if you're going to compare things to. So I think I said earlier, you know, that's going to make it very difficult to hit that level. So that's the first point. We obviously fight very hard for every seat. Our councillors, those councils we run, deliver better services at lower cost than Labour ones, and police and crime commissioners that are Conservative deliver lower crime than Labour ones. Well, that's just facts, Jonathan. That's just evidence.
And
they've been out campaigning today really hard across the country. And I mean, we've had some results. We haven't had very many, and it's early days yet. And we'll reach we know we're not going to reach a complete picture until Saturday night.
But the point you've made yourself is that you've admitted you're less popular now than you were in 2021. And the big difference then to lots of people watching tonight is that you had a different leader. Boris Johnson was in charge, and Rishi Sunak has just not been able to get anything like that level of popularity.
In the local elections in 2021, the big difference is we just rolled out the vaccine for the pandemic. We had a massive bounce from that.
And
that was acknowledged by independent experts. That was a cross-government effort, and Rishi Sunak was the one that found the money to pay for it. And that was a high watermark. It was our best set of local election results since 2008. The best set we'd had at any point since we were in government.
And
so that's a very high water
was
base.
Pretty much the worst set you just had. We just mentioned Thurrock there. Chris, absolutely right. We can show you now that Thurrock is still counting, but Labour on 23 seats. They need 25 for a majority, but they're on 23. The Conservatives just on 12 seats there, and Independents on 6. Let's show you how seats have changed hands. Labour has gained 5, the Conservatives have dropped 6, and Independents gaining 1. And Thurrock in the southeast of England, I think Labour...
Labour are making an argument that says this is just the kind of place that they need to win come a general election. Some Conservative sources I'm hearing from are making the point, and you can see other examples of this elsewhere in England, that this is a council that has had a really bleak time, has effectively gone bankrupt and therefore had to crank up council tax.
Yeah.
And so with that, we might be seeing an element of a local response to that. Curiously, a couple of hours ago, talking to some Labour sources, they were saying exactly the same in Birmingham, which is a Labour-controlled council, in terms of the effect that they think that might have on their performance in that part of the West Midlands in the mayoral contest there. So in and amongst the national picture that inevitably we're trying to paint, there can be very significant local factors that might motivate voters in a particular direction in judging the capacity of a previous administration to either run their local services well or the amount that they're charging them in tax.
And you haven't even mentioned the bins in South Tyneside, which
Indeed.
caused what we saw to be a very significant change around there. But just to be clear, is Labour calling the Thurrock result now? Because by our numbers, they might still be short of a majority, even though they've gained seats. But Labour
They are,
now...
so they think that they have the numbers, once the counting is complete, for them to gain control of the council there. Their spokesman saying the people of Thurrock have sent the Conservatives a message that they want change. So that's the arguments, the spin, if you like, from Labour, but with some very particular local factors. It would seem to be playing at least some role.
Well, a council tax rise of 8% is not certainly insignificant, particularly when people have been living through hugely high inflation for a while. Let's just show you some pictures of other things busily going around the country. We see some counting there, Blackpool South. They are really getting busy now after a bit of delay earlier on in the night. Perhaps then we can show you the scene in Oldham. People are busy there too, getting on with it. And the results, it does feel like they're now starting to flow through maybe a bit faster than they were in the first couple of hours. There's the scene there in Exeter now there. I always wonder what's going on in people's minds, and are they thinking about the cameras being on them, or are they just looking nervously at their tally? No, our politicians say no, they're really not. Oh, well, let's ask all of you then. What does it feel like when you're at a count?
You really aren't focusing on the cameras. You're definitely focusing on what the results are. But look, I'll just pick up one point you were saying earlier when you were talking about the results, about what they tell you about the conversation about the general election and are Labour doing well enough. And how are we doing? So obviously you're looking at council results so far, that's all you've had. I'd also say you've got to look at some of the mayoral contests, some of the big ones that are up. When I was campaigning in last week in Ben Houchen's area, in the Tees Valley, that's an area where Labour have got to be doing well. You'd think, looking at the opinion polls, if they're going to win.
And we talked about that quite a lot at the beginning of the programme.
Forgive me for not.
No, not at all. And I'm sure you were.
I was on another channel.
You're on another rival, our friends on another channel. But also we don't get those results until tomorrow afternoon and Saturday.
I agree. So one of my points. What we will see, hopefully, in those places, Mark, is I think perhaps the full mayoral result we were saying earlier in Tees Valley, probably beyond Labour, I think. But will we see a swing that will take those key parliamentary seats, Redcar and Stockton and Hartlepool, into having Labour MPs? And I agree your assessment. I think you're absolutely spot on with what you have said, but we'll see when we get those results what's happening to the Labour Conservative vote share in those areas, and will those parliamentary seats be switching or not?
If you can't win mayoralties like Tees Valley, which it wasn't that long ago that every single parliamentary seat in that area was held by the Labour Party, then you're not doing very well.
But and I accept the majority was like 70%. And look, the government's basically, it's been their pet project.
And it is
more
early.
than anything else. But what we will see is the parliamentary.
And the point I was making was it is early days yet. I mean, as you said, we're going to have 3 days of elections. You're not going to have all the results until the end of Saturday.
But we've been asking you about the results that we have had through, and they're not insignificant in and of themselves. And every results era is important in its own right, because whatever happens in the general election, the people who our viewers have given jobs to tonight or do tomorrow or Saturday, they're going to be in place for the next few years. And the Lib Dems have held Eastleigh, one of your strongholds.
Very pleased about that.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, why do you think you managed to do it?
I think it's just, we have been a significant presence in Eastleigh for a while. We've been in control of the council there. And I think, local people, they like what we're doing. They like having a Liberal Democrat council. Liberal Democrat councillors work hard, and they are... we're getting rewarded at the ballot box. But I think also there is a lot of disillusionment with the Conservatives, and we're finding this time and time again. I'm certainly finding it when I was speaking to my voters on the doors in Richmond Park today, and right across London. I've mostly been in London for these local elections. But I think just to go back to Mark's point, we're expecting to see gains as we go through. We haven't obviously seen a huge amount so far. These are not necessarily our areas of strength that have been reporting so far. We're expecting to see gains. We're expecting to see good progress, but specifically in the areas where we hope to win parliamentary seats.
And talking of which, Eastleigh, right now, you've got 2 Conservative MPs there. Paul Holmes in Eastleigh, Steve Bryan, Winchester. He was a minister, but he's standing down next time round.
Yeah.
How confident would you be that you can turn your success at the local authority level into taking those parliamentary seats?
Well, we're going to continue to work really, really hard campaigning, but for us, winning those council seats and making steady progress is a really, really important part of building towards general election success. We continue to be really optimistic, and I think we'll see the results as they come in over the next few days really start to bear fruit in some of those places where we want to see a good result later in the year.
And would you be brave enough to give us a number that you might be hoping for by the time, as Chris was joking earlier, Match of the Days on Saturday night?
I don't even know when that is, but no. I mean, what I would say is, it's not going to. We had some really spectacular gains last year and the year before. It's not going to be quite at that level. There's not so many seats up for election this year. But we are going to see steady progress towards our goal of winning more MPs at the next general election.
OK, all three of you.
On the subject of Match today and Saturday night, when I said that on the telly earlier, talking about the longevity of the tail of these results, it was pointed out to me that the Police and Crime Commission account in Kent doesn't start until Sunday lunchtime.
Oh, goodness.
So that's after your show's finished. Never mind Match of the Day the night before.
Well, at least they'll be able to watch Match of the Day on Saturday night. No. You three all have to stay until the very bitter end. And you all have to stay until the bitter end, of course, most importantly. Aisha Hazarika, now a Labour peer, has been waiting patiently and can't quite be with us till the bitter end. So let's talk to her now. Welcome to the programme. We've talked quite a lot about the impact of the Labour leadership's position on foreign affairs might have. And we have seen in some places what looks like some voters turning away from them because of that. How significant an issue do you think it might be for the Labour Party tonight?
Well, I think this is an issue that Labour strategists are going to be monitoring very carefully. I mean, Labour wants to be winning as broad a coalition as possible. So I think this is something that they will be concerned about, and they will have to keep monitoring. There's certain areas, particularly the West Midlands, where this could, if the race is tight, particularly for the mayoral thing, they'll be particularly interested in that. But I think their eyes will be on the bigger picture. I mean, just 2 results that we've had in tonight. Hartlepool, my goodness, what a turnaround in fortunes from just a few years ago at that point when Keir Starmer was actually at his lowest ebb. People were saying that he was even considering quitting at that point. And now, here we are a few years on and the party has changed so much. The other thing which I do think is interesting is Thurrock. I mean, that's an area which Labour has always wanted to get back, and it's one of those very important seats if they are going to win a substantial majority. But I don't think Labour can ignore the impact of foreign affairs. But the other story of the night, and of course we're very early in this process, as you've been saying, it won't really be until the weekend that we can properly assess the situation. But the rise of reform is going to be a really, really interesting part of this story as well. If you look at some of the results that are coming in, yes, you're seeing the Labour vote going up, but you are seeing the reform vote going up massively as well. And that is going to have a big hit on the Conservatives.
But what do you think the Labour Party should do about trying to win back the trust, perhaps, of some of those particularly Muslim voters, not just Muslim voters, but some voters who clearly have felt discomfort and unease with the leadership's position on the Israel-Gaza conflict?
Well, I think you've just made a very important point there. Many people just stereotype this and say it's just Muslim voters who care about this, but there is a broader coalition of people across society of different ages, different backgrounds, who of course are really, really traumatised by what's happening in the Middle East. And also people can see that this is a very difficult issue and that there are 2 people in a lot of pain here, the Jewish community and of course you look at what's happening in Gaza as well. I think what the Labour Party has to do, it started to do that more, is to reach out to people more, to have more nuanced conversations about this. They've now called for a ceasefire and David Lammy is out talking to people a lot. But, this is going to be a very sensitive issue. And if Labour does win power at the next general election, foreign affairs and foreign policy is something which historically is difficult for Labour, and I think Labour will want to win all across the country, but it will want to have a broad coalition of support from different backgrounds and different communities.
Aisha, thank you very much indeed for joining us and for being patient before we were able to speak to you. Thanks very much indeed for being with us tonight. Now then, a couple of minutes ago we were talking about Thurrock, the reports coming in from Labour sources on the ground, but we can now confirm, we can show you the seat count. Labour has gained Thurrock. There'll be cock-a-hoop about that. 25 seats there for the Labour Party, 13 for the Conservatives, 6 for Independents. Let's look at the way that seats have changed hands. Labour has gained 6, the Conservatives have lost 7. Now, as Chris was telling us, Thurrock Council has had a shocker. People who live there have had to have an 8% rise in their council tax. They've had to contend with a big rise to that during a cost of living crisis. So, as ever, there's always a local story, but Thurrock, in terms of the national story, will be something seen as a big victory for the Labour Party that they'll be delighted about, as I'm sure we'll hear in the next few minutes of the programme. Let's remind you of the scene at Blackpool South, where the counting is underway in the by-election. That's going to be one of the big headlines of tonight's set of results. Our whispers on the ground there suggests that Labour is miles ahead in terms of first place, but it may be too close to call between the Conservative Party and the Reform Party for second. And remember, not long ago, we were talking to the Reform candidate on the ground, who certainly suggested second place might be within their reach. That kind of result really would give Conservative MPs the proper collywobbles. So they will be hoping that that isn't what comes to pass, but that could be extremely significant if that happens. We are, in just a second, going to speak to the new Labour leader of Hartlepool Council. Before we do that, I want to say thank you very much and goodbye to Sarah Olney, the Lib Dem's Treasury spokesperson, who've been with us for the last part of the programme. Thank you for being with us here in the studio. Jonathan Reynolds and Mark Harper, you're not yet off the hook. You are remaining in your seats for now. But Sarah, thank you so much for your time. It's such a busy night for politicians, so we're grateful to you for being with us. Now, as promised, let's talk then to one of the first victors of the night, Brenda Harrison, who's the new Labour leader of Hartlepool Council. Brenda, congratulations. What do you think swung it for you?
Thank you very much. And I think probably that we have worked so hard to get the trust of the people in Hartlepool back to Labour. And I think that's probably what's done it tonight.
So it was hard work then, rather than the leadership changing things?
A lot of hard work, Laura, a lot of hard work. We've been trying to engage with people for a long time, not just the last few weeks, showing them that we do have a Labour group in Hartlepool who can lead the council well, and that we have committed people who will do the best for the residents of Hartlepool.
And just describe for us how difficult that sort of journey has been. Jonathan Reynolds with us was saying, well, look, we were coming from such a low base. It was very, very difficult. You wouldn't believe the transformation in the Labour Party in the last few years. Except a lot of our viewers might think, well, hang on a minute, that absolutely should always have been Labour natural turf. It was Peter Manelson's seat. It was Labour for as long as you could remember, until the Jeremy Corbyn years. So how would you describe that journey that you've been on?
So locally, it reflected really what was happening nationally as far as the Labour Party was concerned. We had quite a difficult time in Hartlepool going back a few years, where we actually then dropped to 6 councillors in the Labour Party, in the Labour group, and we've risen up over the years, bit by bit, and got back to actually, I think, making people realise that we are to be trusted and that we can do the job that we are now going to be doing.
And do you think that you'll, from this, be able to take back the parliamentary seat when it comes to the general election?
I think that's highly likely. I think that knocking on the doors and talking to a lot of people over the last weeks and months, There are people feel that they want change, and people feel that the Labour Party has changed enough for them to put their trust in them.
The north east of England was traditionally a Labour stronghold for such a long time, but then Brexit changed that very significantly in many parts of it. Do you think that Brexit has sort of disappeared as an issue for you on the doorstep, and that's part of why you've managed to win again?
Well, I think certainly it's had a big effect. I think the fact that Brexit really didn't happen as people thought it would happen, and that people are still waiting for it to happen. And I do think that had a big effect. So the swing that happened in Hartlepool, for example, over the Brexit period, has really gone, and we've swung back again.
OK, Brenda, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Our first victor of the night, joining us here on BBC News Election Night. It's great to speak to you. Let's go then to Oldham, where it sounds like there is less good news for the Labour Party. We've talked a lot. Shelley Phelps is there for us on the ground. We've been talking a lot about the possibility of Labour losing ground because of its policy on Israel and Gaza. Shelley, what are you hearing?
That's right, Laura. Multiple Labour sources here are telling me that they think they've lost control of the council. They only had a majority of 1 before tonight, and that was because 2 councillors quit the party over its stance on Gaza. And tonight I was talking to one councillor asking them if they have lost control, why did they think that was? And they told me that they think it would be because of Gaza and because this is being used as a protest vote. And one interesting thing that they were telling me is that their opponents on their leaflets had actually been putting that LBC interview that Keir Starmer did, remember, when he appeared to suggest that Israel had the right to withhold food and water. But then he clarified those comments and said he only meant to suggest that Israel had the right to defend itself. But this councillor telling me that they felt that the damage in those comments had already been done and that it was difficult for them to recover trust after that. And I was asking them, if the party has lost the trust of Muslim voters, how would this affect the general election? And what this councillor said was really interesting, because he was saying, well, Labour are very far ahead in the polls, and so they would, this might not affect their chances of getting a majority and they might not lose seats, but that they would lose loyal voters and damage those relationships, and that trust would be really hard to win back. And of course, what's happening here, the messages from the councillors and what they're hearing on the ground will feed back up to the top, because we have Jim McMahon, who is a Labour frontbencher in Westminster. He is here at the count. Angela Rayner isn't here, but her Westminster seat, a bit of that falls into this council.
Shelley, thank you very much indeed. Let's put that straight to Jonathan Reynolds, the Shadow Business Secretary. As Shelley was telling us, people in Oldham were putting Keir Starmer's comments on leaflets, and his comments seem there on the ground to have lost you votes. Do you accept that?
Well, as I said at the start, that's been an issue. That's been difficult. No denying that whatsoever. Oldham, obviously next door to me in Tameside. I actually think we will maintain control of the council. We might lose a couple of seats, but gain a couple of others. But yes, that has been challenging. Again, look at the results that we have seen tonight. We've talked about one area where it was the bins that was the major issue. Here we're talking about a major foreign policy issue. This is why local politics can be hard, and you've got to be covering all of those bases. But yes, there'll be a particular issue around the Middle East.
But we were hearing before from Aisha Hazarika, who's a newly ennobled baroness in your party, and she was saying this is really significant, not just for Muslim voters, but also for other voters who have been really concerned about the leadership's stance. What do you have to do? Do you feel you have to do something to make up for those comments that Keir Starmer made at the beginning of all of this?
I think an issue can be difficult, and you still handled it in the right way. Okay, and when you see a conflict as difficult, as frustrating as this is, and we've got limitations as British politicians as to what we can deliver in the Middle East. We've got to be very clear about that. I think one thing that I feel very strongly is when I look and talk to particularly younger voters, not just younger Muslim voters, but younger voters generally, I'm struck by how they have never had in their sort of political lives an active peace process. For people like me, I think of Yitzhak Rabin, I think of the Barak government. I think of times where that has been a process which has been, Oslo, not got us to where we need to be, but that's been a part. And they've had no experience of that. And getting across to people, this is not a zero-sum game. What Israel needs, what Palestinians need, are security, respect, dignity, two states alongside one another. That's the emphasis I think we need more of in the future.
And it is a very sensitive issue, and it is very difficult for any politician to imagine it, and we should not, to manage it, and we shouldn't underestimate that. But I just want to show our viewers some numbers we've been able to crunch. This is the change in areas where there's a high Muslim population since 2021. The Greens up by 16%, but Labour down by 19%. Now, I'm not at all denying that this is a difficult thing to do, but it appears that there could be a really significant impact on your vote.
Well, as I say, it's been difficult. I would want to see a full picture. I think it's quite hard to take a view like that on the information that we have seen so far. But we've known this is difficult. We all know just how people quite rightly feel about the situation, about how we all want to see this conflict come to an end, how we all want a peace process. But it's challenging.
Do you fear this could cost you seats at the general election?
Again, I think let's not get carried away. Let's see the full results, Chris, at the end of this. I still think I would caution anyone in making assumptions about whole communities or about an issue like this being the deciding issue in a general election. People will always, I believe, when it comes to a British general election, be thinking about the cost of living, about public services, about what it means for them and their family. Doesn't mean foreign policy is not important, of course it is, but it's only going to be one of those factors in that.
OK, thank you very much indeed for now, Jonathan. I want to say hello to Baroness Susan Kramer for the Liberal Democrats, who's just joined us here on the panel in the studio. Welcome to you, and we'll be back with all of you shortly. Let's remind you on where our seat totals are so far. You can see there Labour has gained 23. They've made it over the century mark. First party to do so on 109. The Lib Dems have gained 5 seats, and the Tories are on 25. They've lost 48. The Conservatives at this stage, oh look, they've just lost another one. At this stage, the Tories are losing more than 60% of the seats that they are defending. And at this very early stage, that is the Tories heading for what worse than what might have been expected if indeed they do lose 60% of the seats that they were defending. So far they are on a bad track, but we may well have zigzags up and down throughout the night. One result just to bring you before we talk to Reeta. North East Lincolnshire, which was held by the Conservatives, east of England, has been a very sort of Brexit stronghold. The Tories have lost control of that council. Not everything is counted, I don't think, so far, but we can tell you they've lost their control there. The Conservatives on 17 seats, Labour with 14, Independents 4, Lib Dems on 3. We can show you what happened in the change of seats. The Tories lost 6, Labour gaining 5. And we were hearing from our colleague there on the ground, Tim Iredale, there in Grimsby. That was somewhere where Labour really fancied their chances. They were very keen to do well, and they have managed to knock the Conservatives out of controlling that council. One of the parts of the country where the Conservatives are experiencing problems tonight. Reeta, take us to Rushmoor in Hampshire. Very different part of the country, but the Tories facing problems there too.
Absolutely. We're being told it's too close to call. They are still counting in Rushmoor. It's in Hampshire. As Laura's just said, it'll leap out at you just there at the bottom of the map. But I can tell you that the Conservatives have lost 4 seats. There's still another 7 seats to be counted. But at the moment, this is how it looks. Labour on 17, the Conservatives on 12, the Lib Dems on 3. Now, the Conservatives have held this council since the year 2000. It's never been Labour, but let me just show you what's happened to the share of the vote. This is since 2021, and look at that. I mean, how striking that is. Labour up 15 points since 2021, and the Conservatives down 14 points. This in a council that is really very much a Tory stronghold. So it's too close to call, we're being told, but we'll come back to you as soon as we've got more information.
Thank you, Reeta. And that would be the first time that Labour has held that Council in Hampshire. Interesting because it's a military base. Aldershot is the main town in Rushmoor Council, so really interesting if Labour managed to take that, as it appears they might be on course to do, but too close to call. Let's take you to somewhere else that might be too close to call, but somewhere that's been very, very tightly fought, one of those Labour Conservative battlegrounds. Let's go to Redditch and my colleague James Pearson, who's there for us on the ground. So what are you hearing, James, since we spoke to you last?
So counting has been underway here for about 40-45 minutes. We should start getting those first results to add to your seat totals in the next sort of hour or so, maybe a final result between 4 and 5. Now it's slipping back, it's very slow here. I've been trying to speak to the different parties to get a sense of what's going to happen here. The Conservatives have had a very slim majority on this council of 3 for the last year, so they are up against it tonight in terms of defending control of the council. They've not admitted defeat yet. They still think there's a chance they could hold on to some seats here, maybe even control. Labour, quietly confident. Speaking to the smaller parties, though, the Lib Dems and the Greens, they do feel that Labour's done enough to take this council tonight. It's a council, Redditch, that Labour's national campaign has targeted as a place they can make gains in, both in this local election and in the general election coming up as well. So from speaking to the smaller parties, it does sound like Labour's done enough here tonight, but we'll have to wait for those seat results to start coming in the next hour.
And James, when you've been talking to people during the campaign, what are the issues that have been shifting votes around, do you think?
So there are some big local issues as well as the national picture. Locally, the Conservatives have tried to make a lot of the fact that Redditch has attracted just over £20 million of levelling up money to regenerate the town centre, to regenerate the train station. Labour, though, have basically been arguing that that money hasn't been spent in the right place to achieve the levelling up that people want to see here. They focused on the sentiment in the town that the town centre, the district centres aren't really going in the direction that people want them to be. Both sides admit that there hasn't really been enough investment in Redditch the last couple of years, so that's something that's come to play. From going out with the political parties on the doorstep, you do get the sense as well that there are a lot of Conservative voters who will take a lot of convincing to come out and vote for the Conservatives this year, and that could be the main thing, Conservative voters deciding they don't want to vote this time.
James, thank you so much for joining us. Give us a shout when you have got news there from Redditch, a really interesting and important Tory-Labour battleground. And James there mentioning the power of the sofa vote, because of course staying at home is a different kind of vote, but a vote nonetheless. Let's take you around the country. We can show you what's going on in Plymouth, where there is counting going on, and it looks like people are waiting for something that might be imminent. We'll listen in carefully there and bring you it when there's any. Oh, there's someone coming onto the stage. So let's just take a listen in. It may be just one ward results, but let's have a listen, because why not?
I, Tracy Lee, being the returning officer for the election of a ward councillor for the Plimpton Earl ward, do hereby give notice that the number of votes recorded for each candidate is as follows. Endine Peter, Reform UK, 221. Glennie Suzanne, the Conservative Party candidate, 336. Jakes Michaela, commonly known as Jakes Mickey, Green Party candidate, 114. Loveridge Andrea Victoria, Independent, 896. Oran Christopher Michael, Liberal Democrats, 235. Soper Sebastian Anthony, commonly known as Soper, Seb, Labour and Cooperative Party, 483.
Ward result there, but it sounds like that ward there in Plymouth was taken by an independent. Very, very close call between the Reform Party and the Liberal Democrats, only 4 votes in it. But that particular situation there, Susan Kramer, just one ward, just giving you a flavour of some of the events that are going on, and that ward was taken by an independent, which is something we've seen in a few places tonight, not least in South Tyneside, where there's the story of the bins, and the independents have done terribly, terribly well. But Susan, how much is interesting In a time like this, I know Lib Dem activists have got a reputation for working terribly hard on the ground, but do you think that you've been able to capitalise on these guys' problems?
Well, I think we have, but in a very targeted way. I mean, we've been looking at the areas where we think we can win. So where the feedback that we get is that Conservative voters want to switch. And they're finding our party attractive and that they're the answer. And that's where we're putting our resources. Now, many of those seats will come through tonight and on Saturday. So we knew that sort of the early returns would not be particularly catching so what we think is some of the impact that we've made over this election. And the feedback, you know, from places like Oxfordshire, from parts of Hampshire, where we've been looking at Hertfordshire, that the very early days, we're obviously relying on people actually standing at the counter and watching the boxes. But that feedback is frankly looking good. Otherwise, we've been expecting a Labour surge. That's somewhat perhaps surprised that sometimes the independents are pipping that at the post.
And why do you think that is?
I'm not in the mind of the voters. I think with a local election, you frankly have to understand what the local issues are, because it can easily be the bins. I do think that where we've been focusing our efforts are to say we want to get rid of a Tory government at the next general election. We also want to do right by people in their local area, but essentially, as we have to target our resources, we have to bring those two thought processes together.
What then about tactical voting? Because small parties like, whether it's the Lib Dems or the Greens, you can't be everywhere. But what you would say, what you've just said, is you want to see the back of the Conservative government. The Greens would also say they want to see the back of the Conservative government. The Labour Party, Jonathan Reynolds, you would also say you want to see the back of the Conservative government. What about tactical voting and working together?
Well, I don't think we are working together. We're certainly not from the centre, because we think that the voters really need to have the freedom to be able to make their choice. But when you've got a first-past-the-post system, people do it on a sort of do-it-yourself basis.
DIY tactic.
DIY tactic, or DIY, alternative voting almost. They do it themselves, and I can understand perfectly why they do it. So we often, though, find that when people make that shift, they then stick because they get to know Lib Dems who frequently they might not have been very familiar with under other circumstances.
So, I mean, I agree with that. Voters make those decisions. If you're a Labour candidate or a Liberal candidate or a Conservative, you don't control those voters and transfer them to other parties. I think that's always a misconception. One thing we saw last year in the local election results and the year before, and I think we'll see in this one again, is, look, for an area like mine in Greater Manchester, a huge amount of the money has been taken out of local councils. A lot of the budget now, a big proportion, goes on things that most voters don't see. So that's services for vulnerable adults and children. The amount of kind of discretionary money the council's spending on parks and things like that is much smaller. And it does mean you get, I think, a much greater anti-incumbency part of that. Sometimes that's Liberal, sometimes that's Green, sometimes that's Independent. That is what has made local politics much tougher in the way you don't really get, if I'm being honest, an extrapolation of the national polling into those local areas, and then you put in the bins and LTNs
Except
and all
you
that
just
as
go
well.
back to the idea of tactical voting, though. It is one thing for you two to say, well, people kind of do it themselves. It is another thing, though, for central parties actually to make decisions to campaign in a different way and actually just to quietly stand back. Now, that doesn't have to be giving people an instruction to go and vote tactically, but it sounds like you're both actually quite comfortable with the idea of some of these sort of
loose... You
loose...
don't coordinate that. I mean, you always, any political party looks at where the competitive races are and where resources will go. It's always scarce. For my part, just looking as we come to where we are tonight, whether it is in Thurrock or Hartlepool or Blackpool when we get the result, Redditch, what I said at the start of this programme is Labour gaining in those seats against the Conservative Party, but we want to replace Conservative MPs with Labour MPs at the next general election. Yes, that's what we're seeing already.
But if you weren't gaining when you're this close to a general election and you're 20 points ahead of the national pollers, something very, very strange would be going on and you would be, defending an extremely sticky wicket.
Well, look, I've been on this programme when I have been defending an extremely sticky wicket, and I'm glad tonight that's not the case. It's the progress we want to see, nothing taken for granted, but very encouraging.
Mark, do you sometimes feel a bit, as a Conservative at the moment, whether it's voters or whether it's these two ganging up against you, everybody you say wants to get rid of the Conservative government?
No, I don't. And as I said, look,
It's going to be difficult because we're operating against that high base. We're in government, and if you're in government, it's always difficult when you have local elections. But also, as I said earlier on...
It's not actually. There's some years when governments do gain.
Well,
that happened in 2011, I think, 2015, 2017. It's not always the case.
It doesn't happen very often. And as I said, 2021, when we did very well, was an unusual one. And also, as I said, this time, we've got an unusual set of elections, because it isn't just council elections. It's Police and Crime Commission elections. We're only going to get 2 of those tonight. And there's those very important mayoral contests as well. And we're not going to get those tonight either. And I think you do need to just wait and see what the overall picture looks like before you start drawing conclusions. And as we said, we're not going to know that till, well, even past match of the day on Saturday.
And that's absolutely right. However, whether it is what we know so far, where the Conservatives at the moment are losing, it seems, around 60% of the seats that they're defending. And that's a worse track record than last year when you performed very badly. You've had months and months of being very significantly behind in the national polls. If real votes from real voters are stacking up in the way we've seen so far, what has to change?
Well, look, we know there are lots of voters who voted for us last time who are currently undecided, right? And that's clear. They haven't switched to anybody else. They're undecided.
Well, they might be switching
and
tonight.
So, well, the turnout in a general election is much higher than it is in local elections. I don't know whether the turnout will settle tonight, but it won't be at general election levels. So look, the challenge for us is those voters, we've got to show them that we're focused on the things they're concerned about, which I think we are. That's why we're making progress on delivering cuts to people's national insurance. In the last couple of weeks, you saw big announcements on changes we want to make to welfare to support people, get more people who've fallen out of the labour market into work. Big announcement on defence, paid for by reductions in getting the size of the state back to where it was before the pandemic.
Your defence announcement is the same as what Boris Johnson promised in 2022, and you said your changes to benefit are to support some people, and some people see them as having money taken away from them.
Well, no, it's 2 things. First of all, on the defence thing, you can't make commitments without showing how you're going to pay for it. We've set out clearly in that announcement how we're going to pay for it. Labour won't match it, because I don't think Labour want to reduce the number of civil servants.
You're telling me sacking civil servants produces that increase in defence. That is ludicrous, Mark. That's why people... You can't say these things and say you're serious about it.
We want to reduce the size of the civil service. Not doing anything ridiculous, just back to where it was before the pandemic.
And that will fund the level of defence spending you're talking about.
That's just not true. The rest of it is taking the investment we're making in research and development and spending most of that on improving research and development on defence. We've set it out very clearly. That's a really important thing, defending the nation in these difficult times. So if we continue to set out policies like I think will persuade our voters that, firstly, they want to support us, and when they see the choice between our party and the Labour Party and between the 2 people, there are only 2 people who are going to be Prime Minister at the end of that general election, either Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer. When you look at the choice, then I think we will persuade people to vote for us. But that is the battle that we're going to have for the rest of this year.
That is the battle and people are choosing Labour.
Can I just say that this is nothing to do with what I'm hearing on the doorstep. When I'm on the doorstep, people are saying cost of living. And although the government keeps telling them that everything is better and getting better, that is not their personal experience. It's getting worse. So they've been trying to get GP appointments. I mean, people who never thought it would be difficult to go and see a GP when something is wrong are finding it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks before they can get a GP appointment. And then simple stuff you would have thought, like sewage in the water, which in a sense is touchstone. It almost feels like it touches on the decay of the nation. So it's so offensive. And again, nothing much ever seems to happen or get done to deal with these kinds of issues. And I think they're looking at those kinds of sets of issues. That's not what I'm telling them. That's what they're telling me. And they're not answered by any of the things, frankly, that I'm hearing coming out of the Conservative Party. And they're not, they do explain, I think, the change in the patterns that you're describing when you see the change in the vote.
Mark, we're going to say goodbye to you and Jonathan in just a couple of minutes. But Jonathan, briefly, and then...
I mean, that's just not... You wouldn't see Labour winning Selby or Wellingborough or, what we've seen tonight in Hartlepool or Thurrock. If it was just Conservative voters staying at home, that wouldn't have happened.
Mark, just final word to you. I know you're a close ally of Rishi Sunak. You said there only 2 people have got a chance to be Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer. Are you confident that when all of this from the local elections is said and done, that all of your colleagues are going to still think that and none of them are going to say, you know what, actually, the choice between Prime Minister for the country at the general election should be Keir Starmer and Conservative ?
No, I think the Conservative Parliamentary Party is going to be very clear that changing leaders is not a sensible idea. I think colleagues have liked what the Prime Minister's been setting out. I think they're going to get behind the Prime Minister. Yes, they have. There's been huge support for our defence announcement, for example, and our welfare announcement. And actually, colleagues were rallying behind the party to get that Rwanda legislation on the statute book so we can start putting that deterrent in place and deal with the commitment to stop the boats coming to the UK. And they'll notice that the only other party that can get into government has opposed that every step of the way, and we now see wants to have an amnesty for illegal migrants.
Again, that's not true.
And that is,
and 712 people arrived the day they passed the bill.
And we know the deterrent is working because the Irish government have made it clear that they're already seeing an impact from it, and that is what we're going to do to stop those people traffickers.
Okay, well, we had a discussion already with your colleague Chris Heaton-Harris about whether lots of people arriving across the channel yesterday really showed that there was a deterrent effect. But we will now say thank you and goodbye to you, Mark Harper, and you, Jonathan Reynolds, for Labour. Susan, don't go anywhere. You're staying with us. You don't go anywhere. Stay with us. We'll bring you the latest titles on our giant tower. Labour's gained 31 seats now, putting them to 137. The Liberal Democrats gaining 8 on 43. Labour there, 137, having gained 31, and the Tories having lost 64, putting them on 35. Independents gaining 18 to 29, doing well so far tonight. Residents Association there, that's what RA stands for, with 5 seats, not having gained any, but the Greens having gained 7, perhaps on course for a very good performance with their on 10 seats so far. So, lots more to digest after the news with Regina Vaidyanathan.
Thanks very much, Laura. Now, results are being declared in the local elections in parts of England in the last significant test of public opinion before the general election. In the last hour, Labour have taken control of 2 councils, Hartlepool and Thurrock in Essex. They've held others, including South Tyneside, Plymouth and Ipswich. The Conservatives have lost control of North East Lincolnshire, but they have held on to Broxbourne. Counting's underway for the parliamentary by-election in Blackpool South, as well as 35 councils overnight. Our political correspondent Damien Grammaticus has more.
Up for grabs in these elections, 2,500 council seats, 11 mayoral jobs, and here in Blackpool South, 1 Westminster seat. It's one of the consequential battles tonight. Labour hopeful they can take it off the Conservatives. And the first council of the night to change hands, Hartlepool.
Q&A at Bailey Fleet, Labour and Cooperative Party, 649 votes.
The Conservatives lost 6 councillors here. Labour gained back control. The win is a symbolic one for them, clawing back lost ground.
We have worked so hard to get the trust of the people in Hartlepool back to Labour, and I think that's probably what's done it tonight.
But there are warning signs for Labour too. This is Oldham. In some areas with substantial numbers of Muslim voters, Labour are struggling to hold on to support. Rushmoor in Hampshire, a southern Conservative council and another Labour target. Conservative minister here at the count, his party braced for losses of seats won back when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister.
The last time most of these seats were fought was in 2021, where we had effectively a vaccine bounce as we rolled out the COVID vaccine. That was our best set of local elections since 2008. So that's a very high base. So compared to that, it is going to be difficult to achieve on that.
In Hull, an alarm and an evacuation. Whether Conservatives think these elections signal trouble ahead for them will depend on the scale of any losses. In Stockport, where they're counting in a car park, Liberal Democrats could make gains from Labour, but what they're most focused on are the places they face off with Conservatives.
Across the country, we've heard that people are absolutely fed up of the Conservatives. And across the blue wall, lifelong Conservatives are switching to the Liberal Democrats, so we're very optimistic. People want to cast a verdict on the Conservatives' appalling record on the NHS and care, on the fact they've allowed the water companies to pump their sewage into our rivers, and the cost of living crisis.
In Grimsby, Conservatives are facing a tough night too. They've controlled North East Lincolnshire Council since 2019 and may see support eroding here. It's exactly the sort of place Labour will be targeting at the general election. Damon Grammaticus, BBC News.
Now to the United States, and President Biden has urged pro-Palestinian protesters on university campuses to uphold the rule of law. There have been further clashes between police and demonstrators in a number of cities, including Portland in Oregon and in Washington, D.C. Earlier, riot police dismantled a camp at the University of California in Los Angeles. The protests against the war in Gaza have spread to around 50 campus sites, with more than 2,000 people arrested across America in the past fortnight.
Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest. Threatening people, intimidating people, instilling fear in people is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law.
A man has appeared in court charged with the murder of the schoolboy Daniel Angerin in north-east London. Daniel, who was 14, was on his way to school when he was fatally stabbed in Hainault on Tuesday. Marcus Monzo, who's 36, also faces several other charges, including 2 counts of attempted murder. To Brazil, where a hydroelectric dam's collapsed after days of heavy rains that have killed at least 31 people. At least 60 people are missing and 15,000 have been forced to leave their homes since the storms began on Saturday. At least 500,000 people are without power and clean water across the state of Rio Grande do Sul. The extreme weather has been caused by a rare combination of hotter than average temperatures, high humidity and strong winds. Apple has seen its biggest fall in sales in more than a year. The tech giant saw a sharp drop in demand for its most important product, the iPhone, with sales of the device dropping by 10% from January to March compared with the previous year. Executives said the results were distorted by COVID-related supply disruptions, which led to unusually strong sales during the same period last year. The King and Queen have been presented with the official document recording their coronation almost a year after the service at Westminster Abbey. For at least 700 years, monarchs have been given a coronation roll with a handwritten official record of their crowning. For the first time, the manuscript will not use any animal skin. King Charles said the 21-metre-long roll goes on for miles, while Queen Camilla said she would need my specs to read it. Well, a reminder that you can follow all the election results overnight on the BBC News website or, of course, on the app. You can also see who's won and where using our postcode checker. You can find that at bbc.co.uk/news or on the app. Now it's time to return to Laura and the team and Elections 2024.
And a warm welcome back to Election Night 2024 on the BBC. There will, of course, in 2024 be a different kind of general election, but what we have tonight and in the next couple of days is a really complicated jigsaw of all sorts of different things. There are mayoral contests, there's a by-election in Blackpool South. We should have the result there before too long. There are also police and crime commissioner elections and council elections across England. Let's show you what's happened so far in those council elections. Here is the state of the parties as things stand. You can see there the Conservatives have lost 71 seats so far. On current trend, that's looking pretty bad, like they're losing about 2/3 of the seats they've been defending. Labour so far have gained 37. The Liberal Democrats have gained 7. So those are the tallies so far for the main parties, although we have seen also some really interesting things happening with the smaller parties so far tonight. Let's say hello to 2 new guests, Jonathan and Jonathan. Well, this is going to be easy in a way. Jonathan Cullis from the Conservative Party, a deputy chair, I believe. Deputy chair, not vice chair. I'm getting that right. It's early in the morning. And Jonathan Ashworth, who is the Shadow Paymaster General. So I think you call yourself Labour's attack dog, really. We're allowed to say that, aren't we?
If you want to call me that, that's fine.
Yeah,
I like to think of myself more as a pussycat, to be honest.
Oh, OK. All right. So maybe a few scratches and not biting. Anyway, we'll chat to you 3 in in a minute. Susan Kramer for the Lib Dems is still with us, I am pleased to say. Right, let's give you what has been quite a dramatic result. We've been able to confirm the numbers during the news. The Labour Party has gained Rushmoor Council from the Conservatives. You can see there they've got 21 seats to the Tories 15, the Lib Dems with 3. Let's look at how seats have changed hands. Labour has gained 7 seats, the Tories losing 8, and the Lib Dems gaining 1 seat. The change in the share, you can see there, Labour on 48%, the Tories on 37%, and the change in that, if we can show you that, Labour gaining 16%, the Tories losing 17%. And I wonder if a bit later we can show you actually the swing there in that council, because that's really interesting. And Rushmoor, we will be on the ground there before too long, but I can tell you that's really interesting, and Labour is cock-a-hoop about that, because not just it's in Hampshire, the south of England, maybe not their natural territory, but they've never held that council before. And also it is the home of Aldershot, which of course is the home of much of the British military. And given how Labour has tried to show they've changed since the Corbyn years in the last few years, I expect that they will be shouting about the Rushmoor result from the rooftops. Let's show you another result that Labour will be pleased about, where the Tories have lost control of North East Lincolnshire Council. Grimsby, the big town there, and you can see what's happened. The Tories lost 8 seats, Labour gained 6, and the Tories have been knocked off controlling that council. Currently, that area is split between 2 Conservative MPs. One of them will be a target for the Labour Party at the general election whenever we get there. So Labour will be pleased to have knocked the Tories out of control there. And let's check in then again with Tim Iredale, my colleague who's in Grimsby for us tonight. You were saying earlier, Tim, that Labour were looking pretty chipper about what they were able to do. Why do you think the result ended up as it is?
Yeah, you know, Laura, I think before a single vote had been counted here tonight, the Conservatives were looking pretty glum. They knew they were onto a loser here in North East Lincolnshire. Before these elections, the Tories had quite a sizable majority on this council, but it's gone now. The Tories are still the largest party, but it is a hung council because Labour made gains tonight. 6 council seats gained at the Tories' expense. Now, this is a classic red wall constituency. The parliamentary constituency of Great Grimsby was won by the Tories at the last general election in 2019 under Boris Johnson's leadership, of course, after decades of Labour dominance. So this will be a big blow to the Tories, losing control of the council here, so close to another general election.
It looks like they're packing up already, Tim. They've been once they got going very quickly. Do you think then that this is likely to translate for the Labour Party? I mean, was this about the national mood or was it about local issues?
Very much about local issues, according to both Conservatives and Labour activists. Now, the 2 Tory MPs who cover this council area, Leah Nietzsche and Martin Vickers, both say that voters haven't seen the economic change they voted for back in 2019. Remember that phrase, levelling up. There has been some levelling up of this area, according to local Tories, but it's not enough. And that's why they were punished here tonight. Now, Labour say they are hopeful of taking forward the progress they made here tonight. But remember, the turnout was very low in this council election, just 22%, Laura.
Tim, thank you so much. We'll be back with you later in the night with news of the other things that are happening in your patch. But thank you very much for bringing us up to date with why Labour has managed to knock the Conservatives out of control in North East Lincolnshire, a really interesting part of the country. Let's talk then to Professor Sir John Curtice about these results we've been hearing. John, we were just talking about Rushmoor being taken by Labour, Labour knocking the Tories out of control in North East Lincolnshire. Give us the context of the kinds of scale of Tory losses we're seeing so far.
Well, let me just first of all say just a little bit specifically about Rushmoor, because this is where we need to get a little bit into the weeds of these elections.
We love the weeds.
As you'll be aware, Laura, in most of the councils, it's only 1 in 3 of the seats that are up for election on yesterday. But Rushmoor was one of those councils where the ward boundaries have been redrawn, and therefore, as a result, all the seats were up for grabs. So that made it more likely there would be a change of control. And it's one of the Tories' misfortune in these local elections that these ward boundary changes have occurred primarily in councils they're trying to control. So that's point one. This was therefore more likely to go. Secondly, actually, if you look at what happened in Rushmoor last year, you will already have seen evidence of the strong swing to Labour, and that indeed Labour won a majority of the seats that were up for election in the 1/3 contest in Rushmoor last year. So basically what Labour needed to do to win Rushmoor was to do as well as they did last year, and they have evidently done at least as well as that. So nothing to downplay the significance of Labour's success, but it's a success, as it were, that's been brewing for quite a while and has been facilitated by the work of the Boundary Commission.
They certainly look pretty happy about it. We're just showing some pictures of the Labour activists in Rushmoor. There they are, all waving their hands in the air, although one of them at the front looks so happy he's not quite sure what to do with himself. I think, actually, let's just show those pictures in all their glory while we continue chatting, John. In terms of the overall picture from what we're seeing, how bad is this looking for the Conservatives?
It's not beginning to look very good for the Conservatives, I think one has to say. I mean, straight away, it's still early. Things could still change, but put it like this, there are two things that perhaps the Conservatives would prefer to avoid, that as we sit here at just after 3 o'clock in the morning, we cannot rule out as perhaps something that we will find out is the case in 12 to 18 hours' time. One, that the Conservatives end up losing 500 seats, which was, as it were, the worst scenario that was painted for them, and that two, that the performance in these local elections, when we kind of add up the votes, is probably going to end up being a little bit worse than it was last year. Put those two things together, the broad message from local ballot boxes will be that Rishi Sunak's principal political project, which is to try to narrow the need on Labour, has not really made much progress. It's what the polls have been telling us. It's now increasingly looking, though, that is what the local ballot boxes are going to tell us too. Now, Labour at that point may want to have a big smile on their face, and there is plenty for Labour to be happy about, but in effect it looks as though we're talking about Labour doing more or less as well as they did last year, which is not bad, and it's roughly what the opinion polls were saying, but it's still the case that Labour are not in these local elections heading for the kind of really dramatic local election performances that they managed to achieve under Tony Blair before the 1997 general election. We're still in a very different world for that, not least, of course, because, for example, the success of the Greens, which is also notable in these elections, and at some time has been hurting Labour, though nothing to like the same extent that Reform have been hurting the Conservatives where Reform has stood, though Reform haven't stood in most of the contests. Finally, on the Liberal Democrats, well, they're up on 2021. It's helping them to make net gains. But actually, so far, they're down a bit on last year, though I think they will say straight away, but a lot of the places where we really have an interest are only voting next year. But we are, I think, going to end up in a picture where, big headline, Conservatives in at least a bigger hole as they were 12 months ago. It's what the polls have been saying. There doesn't seem to be anything in this so far to contradict that message. And to that extent, at least, these results at least don't look as though they're going to provide that much solace to 10 Downing Street.
John, thank you very much for now. And in a couple of minutes, we'll pick up on those points that you were making about the Liberal Democrats having a modest night, which might not be the kind of thing that they want to see in the run-up to a general election. Let's start, though, Jonathan Gullis, with what John was telling us there. He was painting a picture where it looks like you're on course to lose very heavily, maybe 500 seats or more, which was the bottom end of expectations. Your local election performance might be worse than last year. Now, that's pretty dire, isn't it, when you're now in the run-up to a general election? The country knows we're approaching a general election, and it looks like you might have gone backwards.
Well, you appreciate, Laura, that first of all, we've got a multitude of results coming across all the way through until Sunday, really. So we'll have a much clearer picture on what we see before us. But of course, we also accept this was a very challenging set of local elections. Obviously, people have had the pandemic. That had a huge impact, as we know, on society, on the wider economy across the world, not just here in the UK. And then, of course, Vladimir Putin's illegal and immoral war in Ukraine, which had a huge spike in energy prices. But what the Prime Minister did during that time is introduced a furlough scheme to make sure that people were getting their wages whilst also able to stay at home, protect lives and help save the NHS, as well as the energy scheme, and particularly for Stoke-on-Trent ceramic manufacturers getting 40% of their bills covered, which literally meant that the kilns could keep on firing. Yes, we need to get that message across much more. We have 5 clear pledges the Prime Minister must deliver on. We understand the importance of delivery, and we are making good progress, particularly with inflation that was 11.1% when he took office, now down to 3.2%. And on the stop the boats question, we now see clear blue water between the Conservative and Labour Party, where this week Labour have reaffirmed that they would cancel the round of flights and indeed now have a migrant amnesty into this country with what they announced only yesterday, which essentially means that 90,000 plus people will have a right to remain here indefinitely.
Well, we'll pick that up with Jonathan Ashworth. The previous Labour guest denied that was the case, but you've given us a lot to discuss then. You say people have done this partly because of the pandemic, but your previous colleagues who sat in that seat have all said, well, actually, the last time this happened, we were in the pandemic, we had the vaccine bounce, we were much more popular then.
Well, of course, it was specifically with 2021, it was the fact that we were coming out of a second lockdown. About 60%, I think, of the population had their first jab. So it was well documented that there was a vaccine boost and there was a high watermark with those elections. We were well above expectations in terms of what we achieved. Sir John Curtice himself has said that numerous times in the lead up to these local elections.
Maybe that's because you had a different leader.
No, not at all. At the end of the day, what the reality was is that we had, obviously, as I say, that vaccine boost, which is a very big boost at that time to us electorally. Obviously, we're coming off as well, let's not forget, a big set of results in 2019 where people like myself got elected for the first time in the Red Wall. But of course, what happened in 2021 is different to what's happened in 2024. We've had war in Ukraine, we've had unrest in the Middle East, and of course we've had the impact on energy spikes and prices as well.
The point, though, here, Jonathan Gullis, is it not, is that we might be just a couple of months for a general election, or perhaps 4 months away from a general election. Maybe my mental arithmetic isn't up to much at 24 minutes past 3 in the morning. But we are in the run-up to a general election. Everybody watching knows that. Everyone in the country knows that. And from the evidence we have so far, of appreciating it's going early, it seems that Rishi Sunak's hope of appealing to the country and turning things round is going nowhere.
Well, I disagree with that, because actually what the Prime Minister's done with inflation...
That's what votes so far tonight are
What we've seen with inflation is that it's now got down to 3.2% from that 11.1%. We've seen the Prime Minister therefore have the ability to not only continue investing in public services, about 160 billion now a year going into the NHS, or increase from 2021 of 49 billion to schools up to 60 billion by 24-25, and at the same time cutting taxes for working people. So on the average, £900 a year, better off.
What are you going to change if you hope that people will appreciate what you've set out? You said he must deliver on them. You must communicate what you're doing better.
Well, we doubled down on what is the people's priorities, which is the 5 pledges that the Prime Minister has clearly laid out.
What does that mean?
Well, that means delivery means making sure that we do see that growth in the economy, and we've seen that with the package of what we've introduced in the last 2 budgets, that there is a very clear trajectory towards that growth. Ultimately, of course, we're still coming out of a global shock, as I say, led by the illegal war in Ukraine by Vladimir Putin, which had a huge impact on energy prices, as well as the cost of COVID. We know £500 billion has been spent across that pandemic and this current energy price spike by the government, something that is unprecedented, something which the Labour Party has supported. And bearing in mind that when Labour talk about change, Labour is saying they're going to copy and paste something that Rachel Reeves is very fond of, our fiscal rules. As I say, they're saying they're going to allow an amnesty for all migrants who've come here illegally. And ultimately, they're also going to, and they can't make things add up, for example, like they've said in the past in 2021, that they would like to scrap business rates. They've gone silent on that. They haven't explained how they're going to fund that or what they're going to change it to, because Labour simply doesn't have a plan. OK,
we'll talk to Labour in just a second. Jonathan Ashworth is waiting patiently there. But I want to talk about something John Curtice told us about the Liberal Democrats. He suggested they're having quite a modest night, which in the run-up to a general election is perhaps not the kind of thing that they should be expecting. Their vote is on average up by a couple of points on 2021. But so far tonight, it's actually down compared with 2023. We can show you that vote share there. Tories down by 13% since 2021, very significant. The Lib Dem's up 2 since then. But let's just show you the change since last year, 2023. The Lib Dem's actually down by 3%. Let's bring in Sean Kemp, who used to work in the coalition with the Liberal Democrats, Lib Dem former special advisor, who still monitors all these things very closely. Sean, thank you for waiting patiently to speak with us in the early hours of the morning. If you were still working at Lib Dem HQ, would you be happy with what you're seeing so far?
I'm going to be woefully predictable and say what John Curtice said that Lib Dems would say, which is I don't think they thought this would be as big a winning round of local elections as the last one was. So I think at the moment they're fine watching what's coming in. There's a bunch of seats that are probably going to come in sort of tomorrow, well, you know, later on today now, I should say, like places like Wokingham, Tunbridge Wells, and look at Dorset, where they're going to be paying closer attention to those because they're what they see as sort of key battleground areas for the general election. So I don't think they're looking at this and going, oh, we're worried it's not quite as great as last year, because last year was really off the scale great and way beyond what I think a lot of people expected for them. So I think they're okay with this. So I think if they can make some gains in the right areas, they'll be pretty fine with that.
What should they be doing differently, though? Because fine with that is not exactly the kind of thing that a party that really feels like it's on the march and on the way to significant progress, they wouldn't want to have a sentiment like that, would they?
If I was spinning for them, I would go, well, these are a smashing set of results and they're going to knock it out of the park the general election. But I'm trying to be a bit more balanced. I think
yeah, you're not spinning for them. You're telling the truth to our viewers, I hope.
I think they'll be perfect. I honestly think they'll be perfectly happy if they come out of this round and they can see in the seats that they know they're going to be targeting the general election that they're doing quite well. There's two challenges I think they've got. One is just resource. You know, they're still, in a sense, down on the amount of campaigners and so on they once had at their absolute peak. And the other one, I think, actually, just seeing the Greens pick up, a lot of people who maybe are disenchanted with Labour, who maybe think Labour aren't left-wing enough or are angry about the Middle East, I think are now going to the Greens. And that sort of constituency of protest vote, or however you want to describe them, that's kind of gone for the Lib Dems. So some of those votes that they would have been picking up, I suspect they're not picking up now. So that's maybe a reason why you're not seeing them sort of get the kind of votes that maybe you're thinking about. But I'm looking at this set of results and I think they'll be pretty happy, to be honest.
But why is that then, if votes that in a different era would have gone to the Lib Dems are actually now going to the Greens? How do you explain that? Is it the leadership? Is it a lack of difference?
I think there's a couple of reasons. One is still the long tail of coalition. And the other one is just a strategic one about where you look where the Liberal Democrats have to target their resources and where they're going to win. I think 19 of their top 20 target seats are Conservative held. There's the value to them is trying to target Conservative switchers to the Lib Dems and Labour voters in those seats. They're not really, nor should they be interested in chasing some of the voters who might currently be going to the Greens, because that's not who's going to try and get them the seats they're going to need to win at a general election.
Sean, thank you so much for hanging us on. Really interesting to talk to you about that. Sean, making that point there that the Lib Dems really are now facing to Conservative seats much more strongly than they are to Labour seats. Interesting, let's look at our analysis of the numbers so far that we've seen, where the Conservatives are first and the Lib Dems are second. You can see there what's happening. The Tories have fallen away significantly, minus 13% so far since 2021. The Lib Dems just up 1%. Susan, it's interesting. You've been involved in the party for a long time. Is it now the case that the Lib Dems are overwhelmingly just going after disaffected Tories?
Well, I think you may just find, as you start to see the Hull result, that we've just held Hull, which is against Labour. So, you know, don't write us off as a party that fights Labour. We do, but we do where we've been able to build that base strength. But I think at the moment the sense of pressure is we have got to get a change of government at the general election. That is something so driving and urgent. That is one of the reasons why we're very much focused on working with Conservatives who feel that the Conservative Party is no longer their party.
Well,
and if I just let me look at some of the results that are beginning to come through there. So, you know, I've been keeping half an eye on the seats, the constituencies of Cheadle and Hazel Grove. Now that falls within Stockport as a council. But it looks like the Conservative vote has completely collapsed there. In those two seats, we've taken the seat of Hart in Hampshire. Oh, sorry, we haven't taken it. We've become the largest party, overtaking the Conservatives.
So I think we need to plug your phone into our results system, Susan. I think we can confirm.
We're now the largest party. That's in Essex. I just gently remind John Curtice, whom I think is wonderful and I'm a great admirer. But I do remember
in the last election results at this time that he was making the same kind of comments about the Liberal Democrats. And then when we finally got to the end of the whole play and the weekend when all the results came out, we had won over 400 gains, more than any other party. I'm not saying we're going to do that same kind of momentum today. It's fewer seats, they're in different places and whatever else. But I'm suggesting to John, we might be in a rather better position than that which I think he's suggesting.
Well, we can confirm some of the things that you were telling us with your incredible data on your phone. We've confirmed that the Lib Dems have held Hull Council, and also that Hart Council in Hampshire is hung. So that is indeed what Susan was telling us, and the Lib Dems have indeed become the largest party in Hart Council in Hampshire. So she was trying to strike a more optimistic note than John Curtice was suggesting about the Lib Dems, quite rightly reminding us that there is a long way to go. And this is a really, really complicated jigsaw that we're putting together, isn't it, Chris?
It is.
The overall state of the party so far, the Labour have put on 39 councillors, taking them to 166. Lib Dems have gained 7, taking them up to 52. We can show you the numbers as they've been coming in there, the overall tallies. But what's your sense of how the parties are feeling at this point at 3:34 privately, rather than the more diplomatic things perhaps we have to hear in the studio?
Well, in the last 10 or 15 minutes, I think, certainly as far as my WhatsApps are concerned, the most sort of, the highest ranking on the excitometer since we started talking at what it was 20 to midnight has come from Labour folk around that result in Rushmoor in Hampshire. So Labour have taken control there from the Conservatives. It's a council they've never held before. One senior source texted me saying, I can't think of a bigger example of voters seeing us, that's a reference to the Labour Party, as a changed party. Another texter pointing out that that's a better advance than the party managed under Tony Blair. So let's be clear, in the next few days, every party will seize on particular results that allow them to make a particular argument. But from Labour's perspective, that has tried in the last couple of years under Keir Starmer to regain the trust of particularly those communities with significant military footprints, and Aldershot, that part of Hampshire absolutely has that. They are seizing on that result to say that that shows that their party has changed. And as I say, in terms of sentiment and excitability, that's the most striking result I've seen so far in terms of the response that it has provoked.
And when the parties do, as they do, we've heard it here tonight, we'll hear it in the next couple of days, when the parties say, aha, but you have to look at the map, you have to look at the geography, you pesky journalists can't just concentrate on the numbers.
Yeah.
Are they right?
Broadly speaking, yes, when they're doing their mapping, particularly as far as how things might be at the general election. I'm at pains to point out, of course, when people like me are banging on about the general election, these results are important for their own sake, irrespective of what it might mean at a general election. Newly elected or re-elected councillors in control of millions of pounds of money and deciding so much that we rely on day to day the minute we set out of our front door. But geography matters because the imprint that parties have in particular parts of the country matters when you look at a first-past-the-post voting system at Westminster, where you have to accumulate a significant number of voters in a relatively tight geographical area to win a seat. So particularly, for instance, for the Liberal Democrats, you look at how they might poll in a national opinion poll, it's relatively useless as a guide to how they might perform if they are successful in concentrating geographically their efforts in places particularly, but not exclusively, against the Conservatives in the south of England come a general election. And it's interesting hearing from Liberal Democrats out on the ground tonight that they hope when more of the results that they're keen on during the day on Friday come through, that they're making gains against Conservatives in the south of England, in places like Oxfordshire and Hampshire. So absolutely geography matters.
And of course, those local council jobs, all hugely important in their own right. Those
Yeah.
people are elected in the next couple of days, and tonight we'll be making decisions for all of us, whatever happens in the next general election. But councillors are also so important because they're the foot soldiers, often who stuff the envelopes and pound the pavements.
And that's where it comes back, doesn't it, to mood and sentiment, not just numbers of foot soldiers and pavement pounders, but also the extent to which you have fuel in the tank because you've had a good set of local elections and it empowers you to think, let's do more door knocking in the coming months. or the opposite.
And then you have to pay pizza delivery leaflet deliverers to go and get your stuff out, which political parties sometimes have to do. Chris, thanks for it now. I'm just going to check in with the pictures of what's going on in Blackpool South. Remember, that is one of the really significant contests in this first slew of results. We can see they're starting to stack things up there. We had to wait a bit of time for the votes to be verified before the count got going. Our expectation on the ground from Helen Catt, who's been keeping us up to date, is that Labour believes they will take that seat. The competition there, but there's some smiling Conservatives. I was just about to say the competition there seems to be really, really tight between the Tories and Reform for second place. But I don't know if those smiling Conservatives strolling through mean that they are actually more confident now than they were a couple of hours ago about being able to hold Reform off into getting the bronze medal there. But the result of Blackpool South will be significant when it comes in, not just if Labour can confirm it has taken another Westminster seat, but also in regards of what has happened to the split between the Reform vote and the Conservatives vote there in Blackpool, with a turnout there of 32%. Which for a local election or a by-election is the kind of thing that we would expect. Let's though talk to Carla Denyer, the co-leader of the Greens. Now, we've been talking about the Greens. Carla, welcome to the programme. You've gained seats in Newcastle, South Tyneside, Exeter, Plymouth, Peterborough. It's shaping up to be a pretty good night for you.
It is. Of course, it's early days, as everyone's been pointing out, but it certainly seems to be a promising start, and many of our target seats are expecting their results on Friday afternoon or Saturday, so we're expecting much more to come.
And why do you think you're seeing, though, the gains that you've already got?
Well, as you know, this has sort of come on the back of several successive years of good results for us. We've more than quadrupled our number of Green councillors across England and Wales in the last 4 local elections, and we were going into this one not taking any votes for granted, of course, but having a realistic expectation of further gains and making a new record number of Green councillors. I think it's a variety of reasons that people are coming to us, to be honest. Our experience when we speak to people on the doorstep is that they already know that they really like Green Party policies, and the reason that they were previously hesitating about whether to vote for us was about often worrying that we wouldn't get elected, whereas now, having seen in the last few years, they will have often seen more Green councillors being elected in their area than ever before. They have that confidence that if they want Green policies, they can vote Green and they will get Green councillors working hard for them all year round. And I think that's what we're seeing in Newcastle, for example, where we've just got our first 2 Green councillors elected, where I think parts of the Muslim community switching their votes from Labour to Green is definitely part of what's going on. But what Khalid, one of our newly elected councillors, was saying to your colleagues on Radio 4 just earlier is that really it's that the whole community was feeling a bit left behind and not well looked after by its current councillors.
In terms of the next gains that you'd like to see, I mean, where do you feel hopeful? Maybe in Bristol, perhaps, where I know that you've been doing well. You hope to stand as an MP in Bristol in one of the seats there. Bristol, Solihull, other places where you might see progress?
That's right, yeah. My home city of Bristol, we already have 24 Green councillors. That makes us the largest party by 1. We're not currently part of the administration because Bristol has had a directly elected mayor who was Labour, but that role finishes at this election. Bristol switches to a committee system which encourages more cross-party working, and that's something that the Greens supported because we don't think anyone has a monopoly on good ideas, and we're prepared to work with other parties on areas we agree. But given that we're going into those local elections already as the largest party, and we're hoping to gain a few more seats, there is a reasonable chance that we'll be part of the administration, and that will make it the first core city, so that's the first of the large cities in the UK to have Greens in administration.
Do you think it's then realistic, though, for you to be able to build on that success you hope for and actually contest parliamentary seats in Bristol where Labour MPs have got pretty convincing majorities? I think you're planning to go up against Thangnam Debonair, who's in the shadow cabinet.
Yes, although it's worth noting that I'm standing in a brand new constituency, new boundaries, and although the previous constituency of Bristol West was already a promising one for the Greens, it's even more so with the boundary changes. We think those changes roughly halve the Labour majority on their own, not accounting for the fact that voters' opinions, the leadership of the Labour Party has changed, a number of other factors locally and nationally. And simply my experience speaking to voters on the doorstep, voters are really, really sick of this Conservative government and the way they've run this country into the ground over the last 14 years, but they're not really feeling inspired by what Keir Starmer's Labour Party is offering, and they're really excited at the opportunity to vote and elect the city's first Green MP.
OK, Carla Daniel, thanks very much indeed for joining us here on the programme tonight, and it will be interesting to see what more progress the Green Party can make in the coming days as we get the full picture of results. Always interesting to hear directly from the smaller parties. But one of the big things we'll be talking about in the last 10 minutes or so is Labour's victory in Rushmoor, taking control of that council in Hampshire for the first time. Now, Reeta, this is a really interesting one, isn't it? And you can see, actually, goodness me, the scale of how steeply Labour goes up there.
Very much so, Laura, and also the fact of the boundary changes and the difference that that has made to the result for Labour, because this is fascinating. If you have a look here we are, 2024, this is the result, Labour on 48%, the Conservatives on 37%. But you can see that actually last year, Labour overtook the Conservatives in terms of share of the vote, but that clearly didn't translate into seats. Labour won 5 seats last year round, nibbling into the Conservatives' majority there, but they didn't actually manage to gain the council. And it's just look at the historical sweep here. This goes back to 2002. So for 2 decades, this has been Conservative, 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 really the high water mark being there in 2021 under Boris Johnson. Then they start to dip. And as I say, the red line crosses the blue just between 22 and 2023. And a little word here for the Liberal Democrats as well, who, as you can see, have lost support from last year and then from 2 years ago as well. So that just goes again to underline the so far slightly lacklustre performance by the Lib Dems, although, as has been pointed out, the night is still young, and not just the night, but the elections are still young, and that might change over the next few hours and even days. These are the councils to watch that I showed you right at the beginning of the night. Feels like quite a long time ago now, and the ones that are flashing are the ones that have changed hands. So Rushmoor, just been talking about, obviously, is a Labour gain. North East Lincolnshire was Conservative, and it's now in no overall control. That's a Conservative loss. And then right over here under the councils that were hung, you've got Hartlepool, a Labour gain, and Thurrock, a Labour gain. We'll come back to this screen a little later on and see what else has changed. Laura.
Reeta, thank you very much indeed, as we see them all kind of spin round and the colours begin to be filled in. Well, if this carries on track, the Conservatives are losing more than 60% of their seats that they've been defending so far. We are starting to fill in the blanks. There is still a long way to go, but the trend at this stage is that the Tories are losing more than 60% of the seats they are defending. That would take them beyond what had been set as their worst expectation of losing around 500 seats. So that is what the Conservatives are on track for at the moment. Lots could change, but that is the trend that we are seeing. And Labour picking up, maybe not huge numbers of seats, but picking up in some key parts of the country, like Rushmoor. Jonathan Ashworth, you must be delighted by that result.
Yes, I mean, that is a remarkable result in Rushmoor. Contains the garrison town of Aldershot. I think we would win the Aldershot constituency on this set of results, I think. My understanding is, I think it sounds like the people who text Chris are the same people who are texting me on some of this, and it is a stunning result for us tonight in Rushmoor, in a place where has never been Labour, and it wasn't even Labour in the Tony Blair years. But we've taken back Hartlepool Council, very, very important, given that we lost the Hartlepool constituency a few years ago. Thurrock, that's a seat, that the constituency of Thurrock we lost in 2010, and we've been always wanting to get that one back, so that's a very, very good result. Making gains in Peterborough, another marginal target seat for us, making stunning results in Plymouth. The Tory vote is really collapsing in Plymouth. Johnny Mercer is in trouble.
Veterans Minister.
He's really in trouble here in Plymouth. So, look, Grimsby, another seat that we lost in 2019 that we're very hopeful that Melanie On can take back for us at the next general election when it comes. So, look, it's very early in the night. It's going to be early in the weekend, I should say.
It's not that early in the night anymore. It's 3:45 in the morning.
Early in the weekend for the results, though. It's late in the early in the morning. These are the trends so far. Just show that there is some momentum here. And I do think, after 14 years now of failure under the Conservatives, people are fed up. People do think it's time for change. They've had enough of the chaos, the scandal, the fact that they're paying more for everything, paying more in the shops, paying more on their energy bills. They can't get an NHS appointment, can't see a GP when they want to see one, can't get a dentist for love nor money. That is the sense. That sense of change is what we were really picking up on the doorstep. And I do think when the general election comes, people will want to turn the page on the 14 years of decline that we've seen under the Tories.
Let's just bring people a result that actually doesn't tally with what you've been saying. The Tories have held the Police and Crime Commissioner in Lincolnshire. Mark Jones has kept his seat there. Labour's Mike Horder on 31,000 behind his 39,000. Let's look at the share there. These are important elections in their own right. Police and Crime Commissioners have a lot of power to hold the police forces to account. 37% for the Tories, 30% for Labour. But look at this. Look at the state of the drop in share. The Tories losing 23% there. Labour gaining 10. And I know you've been waiting for this. We can show you our first swing of the night. Look at that. Tory to Labour, 16%. We only calculate swing in an election like that or when it's a Westminster seat, not with council elections. So that's the first one that we've been able to show you. Jonathan Ashworth, I suppose one of the questions is how confident would you be that you can translate these kinds of things into Westminster gains? Because these are a complicated set of elections. You've picked out a few examples there of where you hope you'll be able to build on.
We've only had a few results in, to be fair. But
that's the case you're making.
Yeah, but that's quite a swing, isn't it? I mean, you'd be toast if there was a 16% swing to Labour, wouldn't you?
Let's show you again a swing of more than 16% if we can bring it up. I mean, how do you feel about looking at that?
I'm laughing because Jonathan wishes to go, but look, I don't fear anything in Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Talk, because after 70 years of decay and decline under Labour, which held the seat for its entirety until 2019, it's this Prime Minister who delivered 56 million for the Levelling Up Fund that's seeing jobs created at key sites like the Goods Yard, Kidsgrove Sports Centre refurbished and reopened, which Labour couldn't be bothered to spend a pound coin to save in 2017, up to 1,700 jobs at Chatley West, 500 brand new Home Office jobs, hundreds of millions of pounds to fix our broken roads and pavements, which Labour Council simply won't do. We are delivering in Stoke-on-Trent, and believe me, the voters can see it.
And you're making the case for your own constituency, but as somebody with a senior job in the Conservative Party, when you look at that swing, what goes through your mind?
What goes to mind is that Mark did a fantastic job in holding that seat, and obviously under very difficult circumstances, and also after a set of elections where, as I say, we had a vaccine boost. And when it came to those results, we're obviously in a very different world now where we've seen the cost of COVID on the global economy that's been felt across the world. And of course, obviously that illegal and immoral war in Ukraine, which has obviously meant people have really felt the squeeze. And the Prime Minister, through the furlough scheme, through the COVID grants, through the energy support schemes for both individuals in their households as well as businesses, has been there to support them. £500 billion. That is unprecedented levels of support, which again, the Labour Party has not opposed at any stage. And the Labour Party continues to say they'll back our fiscal rules. So Jonathan can talk about change, but what's the change?
But it's very interesting to hear you point to evidence of success of a Conservative government being about writing big cheques, huge cheques, growing the state. Lots of Conservatives privately actually say one of the problems here is that you have done all of this spending, you have grown the government, you have been stepping into people's lives in ways that some Conservatives don't like. They don't like a plan to ban smoking. They might rather turn to something they might see as a true Conservative party.
Well, look, at the end of the day, when we had COVID, it was unprecedented. Every country in the world made unprecedented levels of support from the central government, which is still taxpayers' money, in order to protect lives and livelihoods. And that was exactly and appropriately the right thing to do. And that had overwhelming support, which ended up seeing the type of results we saw in 2021. Let's be in no doubt about that. And again, that was consensus across the House for that level of support that was introduced as well. So ultimately, I think the voters understand that we did the right thing. I still speak with constituents to this day who say they have a roof over their head because of furlough. I speak to ceramic manufacturers, who have the kilns still firing because of the support they've had for energy. And ultimately, we are a party with a plan, a 5-point pledge that the Prime Minister is very clear about, is working hard and delivering on. And Labour keep flip-flopping on workers' rights. Again, we're hearing that's going to be watered down. The £28 billion on some Green New Deal, again, all over the place for months on end. And now saying they'd scrap the Rwanda fights, and they would now say that if you come here illegally, you'd have a right to remain indefinitely, essentially, because they're going to say that you can apply for asylum.
And I want in a couple of minutes to ask Jonathan Ashworth about that and Labour's immigration policy, because it's important to a lot of voters and it's important to a lot of people watching tonight. But let's go to Plymouth and talk to my colleague Martin Oates, who can bring us up to date with what's been happening there. Just as we begin to talk to him, I'm going to show you the numbers. Labour has held the council. They needed 29 for a majority. They've got 34 seats. The Tories have gone down to just 6 seats on the Plymouth Council. Remember, as we were hearing, one of the MPs there is Johnny Mercer, who's the Veterans Minister. Gary Streeter, a Conservative MP in that part of the world, is retiring and standing down. Let's look at the seats changing hands. Labour's gained 7. The Tories have lost 10 seats. And what that means for the share of the votes. Now, remember, this is compared with 2021 to start with. 37% to 24% for the Conservatives. Let's spin on to the share change. The Conservatives down by a whopping 32% on Plymouth Council. So let's ask what on earth has gone on there with Martin Oates. Martin, what's happened?
Yes, so I mean, you can hear the Labour jubilation behind me, and the prediction I had from a senior Plymouth Tory yesterday that they would be in for a horrible night has come true. I mean, you ran through a few of the statistics there. The other crucial thing, I think, is where these wards have changed hands. Now, as you say, Labour have controlled Plymouth City Council since last year. They've had one MP here in the form of Luke Pollard since 2017. So all eyes would have been on those wards in the north of the city in Johnny Mercer's seat. Well, in reality, those wards have been gobbled up by Labour this evening, so they will clearly feel that augurs very well for their prospects in the general election. You also mentioned Gary Streeter's seat. Now, that's a sort of semi-urban seat. It's got a chunk of the east of Plymouth and then a big chunk of rural Devon. Well, in the Plymouth chunk tonight, also the Conservatives faring very badly. The picture is slightly complicated there because there are some independents in Plymouth born of fractures within the Conservative Party, former Conservatives. They're contributing to the damage to the Tories there, but there will be long faces in that part of the city as well.
And Martin, what would your contacts there on the ground attribute these big changes to? Now, voters might remember last year there was a huge row in Plymouth Council, and one of the reasons the Tories lost so many seats because there was a big argument over trees in the city. Same kind of thing has happened in Sheffield, massive local consequences for politicians there. But this time round, what do you attribute this huge change to?
Well, I think the issue of the trees still seems to be very live for the Conservatives. Now, the Conservative leader who signed that executive order to cut down the trees had disappeared before last year's election. But interestingly enough, when a colleague of mine produced just a pre-election report in Plymouth looking at the topic of the trees, nobody from the Conservative group wished to contribute. Now, as you all know, in an election campaign, it is extremely unusual for no representative of one of the major parties to contribute. I think more broadly, though, I mean, Plymouth's an unusual place in the southwest in that it's a straight fight between the Tories and Labour. Traditionally, it is somewhere that goes with the national tide. So, for instance, Plymouth had 2 Labour city centre MPs all the way through the Blair and Brown years. So if Labour is riding high nationally, you would generally expect Plymouth to be going with that tide.
Martin, thank you so much for joining us. We might be back with you a bit later in the programme. Really interesting result there in Plymouth. Jonathan Gullis, seeing that kind of huge drop for you in the city of your colleague Johnny Mercer, you must be pretty gutted to see a change like that.
Well, of course, I always feel for the councillors who work tremendously hard in their local communities, who pound the pavements, as you say, and a lot of them who work incredibly hard for, let's be quite frank, sort of very little pay in return. They do this because it's about public service. And, you know, on behalf of the Conservative Party, I'm very sorry to see that they've lost their seats. But what I will say is that, you know, the Prime Minister has a clear plan. It's laid out. We are sticking to that plan. We are seeing progress towards those 5 pledges. And ultimately,
is it right to stick to the plan if it's losing you? If the public doesn't like it, are sticking to it the right thing to do?
We know the 5 pledges that the Prime Minister outlined are the priorities of the British public. I hear on my own doorsteps day in, day out, of course, the cost of living is up there, the NHS is up there, and immigration undoubtedly is a major issue as well. And it's the Conservative parties who are the only party in Parliament setting out a clear direction, a clear path. Labour is full of fudge and full of flip-flopping, and ultimately, in best cases, saying they're simply going to copy and paste what we're already doing.
Jonathan, are Reform UK giving you the heebie-jeebies tonight? We saw that result from Lincolnshire, the Police and Crime Commissioner result there, where Reform did well. We've seen elsewhere in Sunderland as well, a couple of hours ago, them doing well there. Granted, in a lot of these local elections, they're not standing, but it would seem that where they are, they're doing pretty well, and that must be concerning to you.
What I would say to those who have or are considering voting for Reform is that we know one of their top priorities, as I say, is about controlling our borders. And a vote for Reform is going to lead to a Labour Party who want an amnesty on migrants coming into this country, who will cancel the Rwanda flights, who have a leader who wanted to campaign for a second referendum and campaign for remaining.
You've got the Rwanda legislation too, haven't you? You were just the other day talking about, albeit unconnected to the new Rwanda project, managing to get an asylum seeker to Rwanda, and yet we're still seeing Reform do as well as they have.
And let's just show voters, actually, the change here. Where the Reform Party's been standing, the change since 2021, the Tories have dropped by 20%. Now, back then they were the Brexit Party, granted, but a drop of 20%.
Well, it's a timely reminder for those who are considering voting Reform that if they do so, they are going to end up with Sir Keir Starmer, who does not share their values and their beliefs in controlling our borders and believing in his patriotism in this country. And let's not forget that Wave Streeting chose yesterday to tweet out that if you vote Conservative, basically if you believe in strong borders, as Susan Hall does, that you're some sort of racist and white supremacist, to quote his words directly. Now, I'm hoping Jonathan will actually condemn those comments, because to suggest that people voting for a mainstream political party and the Conservatives are somehow white supremacists is disgusting and abhorrent, especially when the Labour Party are the ones who are found to have breached the Equality Act 3 times under the former leader, Jeremy Corbyn, with the anti-Semitism that went rampant within that party.
Well, Jonathan, do you want to respond to that?
I mean, this is just nonsense from Jonathan. I mean, he's going on about immigration and Rwanda, and he's doing very well to speedily run through all of his lines in his briefing pack in every question he gets. But you were the guy who was nearly bursting with excitement the other day at Prime Minister's question about this fellow who's been given $3,000 to go back to Rwanda, saying it's oh marvellous. Then we got the news that there's over 700 across in a boat. That's more than your Rwanda scheme's going to. That's more than your Rwanda scheme's going to take over there in a year.
So what's your deterrent? What is your deterrent? Because the Rwanda,
700 in a boat.
Okay, so your idea is we're going to tell people if they come to this country they can claim asylum. You're then going to claim you're going to process them quicker. If you process them quicker, where are you going to put them? So are you going to do returns deals with Iran? Are you going to do returns deal with Syria? The reality is you're not going to do. Please don't patronise me, Jonathan. The reality is you're not going to do a returns deal with Iran, with Syria. So ultimately, you're going to accept them to stay in this country, which means you are aiding and abetting the smuggling gangs, because they'll say, get to the UK, get to the UK, they'll let you claim asylum, and ultimately they'll let you stay here, because as long as you say you're from a country that is no longer safe.
On one boat on Wednesday who's going to get on them flights
Jonathan Ashworth,
if they take off.
We'll find out, won't we?
Yeah, we will.
I want you both to answer.
There's only going to be about 350 on flights.
There's going to be more than that, because there's no cap on the scheme. The Rwandan government has said there is no cap on the scheme. And you and I both know that's the reality. Yes, there is an initial figure to test the system, but there is no cap on the scheme. And when we get that deal off the ground, you watch how many mainstream European countries are going to copy that deal, how many other deals we'll do, but you have no plan. You have no idea, apart from we'll process quicker, accept more. It's a Labour migration amnesty in this country. They'll cancel Rwanda flights. And the only letters they signed...
Trying to give the impression it was all sorted and then 700 turned up on his boat.
Jonathan and
the only letters they signed are for foreign national offenders to stay in this country.
Jonathan and Jonathan, right? Political debates, good to be passionate, but we also want to be able to hear what you're both saying. And I want you both to answer a specific but different question. Firstly, to you, Jonathan Ashworth, what is Labour's proposal to deal with the tens of thousands of people who are stuck in this country in part of the asylum
we have to properly process these, right? We have to process these asylum claims. We have to recruit the staff to process the claims. We have to recruit the staff who can actually deal with the people and send them back to the places that they've come from if they're not supposed to be here and don't have the right to be here.
To be clear
and then we need to go after the criminal gangs and smash the gangs by using terrorist-style laws to go after them.
But to be clear with our viewers, because the Conservatives say they're trying to smash the gangs as well,
but
to be clear with our viewers, what Labour's plan is to allow people who are already here to make their claims, to go through the system, and your plan is to speed the system up and make it more efficient. That is your plan.
We have a huge backlog.
Yeah,
and
but just to be clear,
and that huge
scheme.
Backlog in the system, that huge backlog in the system, entices and encourages the gangs to bring people here. It doesn't deter people, so we need to deal with that. We've got to clear that backlog.
But are you saying categorically, it's a really important point for our viewers, are you saying categorically that the whole notion of deporting people to other countries for their claims to be processed, that definitively comes to an end if you win the election?
We are not continuing with the Rwanda
or
scheme.
Any other country.
But at the moment, these people, right, are in the system, and we are paying for it because they're in a limbo land, and the taxpayer is funding that.
Okay,
we need to process their claims. If they don't have the right to be here, then we will ensure that they are sent back to the countries that they come from if they don't have the right to be here. But at the moment,
like Iran.
But the moment they are in
Syria,
they're in.
Let it
at the moment they are in limbo, staying in hotels paid for by the taxpayer, and they have these gimmicks. While more and more come over in boats, 700 on Wednesday.
Okay.
Laura, if you have 90,000 people told they can stay here, then you'll tell the smugglers that they should be able to bring more people over, which will add more pressure to our hotels, more pressure to our NHS, more pressure to our schools, which comes at a greater cost to the taxpayer. This is what this man's not being honest about.
Right, Jonathan, my specific question to you is how on earth are you going to persuade voters that when you have a scheme which may or may not be able to get about 200 people to Rwanda in short order, because that is the initial capacity of the scheme, how on earth can you convince the public that that is the way to deal with it when there are tens and tens of thousands of people stuck in the system?
Because we've made it perfectly clear, if you arrive in this country illegally, you will not be able to claim asylum. That's one part of the deterrent. We've done the deal with France already. We've stopped 23,000 vessels coming across in 2023. We've got returns agreements with countries like Albania that saw a 90% drop in Albanians.
And yet yesterday, more people came across the channel than
Laura,
at any other point this year.
That makes the case even more important as to why the Rwanda scheme has to get off the ground, and we will get off the ground, and we will ignore any European court that tells us not to. And let's hope Labour, because they're briefing one thing to Andrew Marr, aren't they, saying that they will keep the Rwanda scheme in place for a while.
So
that's
saying something different. You just said that,
so
and then I'm going to bring in Susan Kramer, who has been almost head in hand, Susan, I think, at what these two have been up to. But just you made a point there. Are you saying definitively that the Prime Minister would ignore the ruling of a European court? Because I think that's what you just said.
The Prime Minister has made it abundantly clear he will not allow a foreign court to interfere, and a foreign court would include the European Court of Human Rights. These Rule 39 Bajara injunctions are not based in law, and we will ignore them.
But that didn't end up actually quite like that in the legislation, and some of your colleagues, like Robert Jenrick, wanted it to be. But you've made that point.
He's made it clear in the dispatch box many a time.
OK. Baroness Kramer, listening to these two argue passionately and chuck brickbats over immigration, what goes through your mind?
What goes through my mind is that, you know, what we need to do is bring this country together, not keep trying to split this country apart, and to accuse people of not being patriots because they don't support one policy. This kind of mudslinging is exactly what I find that people on the doorstep are absolutely fed up and tired of. They want the country healed. They want the country pulled together. They want a sensible control mechanism to deal with immigration. They want policies that will forward the quality of the economy. They want decent public services. They want jobs and opportunities. And around that, we build common ground and pull people together. And frankly, if you want to pull people together, please take a look at the Liberal Democrats, because I think that is where we stand. And we can do that, and we can push for that kind of change here in this country. I don't want battles like this to be the heart of our politics. What I want is people working together on the great common ground that we have.
OK, well, there was I thinking, because they've got the same first name, that they might be able to have debate in a slightly different way. But it's good to have passionate arguments in politics. There's no doubt about that. Let's just remind you of the state of the parties. We can show you that there. The Lib Dems, as Susan was just talking about, making some gains tonight. They've gained 5 councillors onto 58. Oh, we can't quite show you that there. I'll just read them out instead. Oh, there it is. The Lib Dems have gained 5 councillors. The Conservatives have lost 84. We are only in the foothills of a Himalayan range of election results in the next few days. But at the moment, they are losing 2/3 of the seats they've been defending. That is very serious. Labour gaining 46, taking them up to 200. The Greens, their co-leader Carla Denyer sounding very cheery and chipper earlier on. They've put on 9 seats, putting them up to 15. Independents and residents who have footholds, importantly in local elections, also their tally is there for you now. And in terms of control of councils, which is important when we talk about the map and when we talk about where the parties want to make gains or are desperate not to make losses. Labour have gained 3 councils, Rushmoor, Hartlepool. They're particularly cock-a-hoop about Rushmoor in Hampshire, and the Tories losing 2. And North East Lincolnshire there is the one that has gone to become hung in no one party's overall control, as Labour knocks off Tory control there. So Labour is making progress in parts of the country that they want to, but we were talking earlier in the night to various guests about some issues they've had with seemingly losing votes over the leadership's stance on the Israel-Gaza conflict. We can speak now to Andrew Fisher, who was one of Jeremy Corbyn's senior advisors when he was leader of the Labour Party. Andrew, thank you for hanging on to speak to us here in the early hours of the morning. From what you've seen so far, how big a problem do you think the leadership's position on the Middle East has been?
It's definitely a problem. I mean, look, overall, Labour is gaining seats from the Conservatives, in places like Rushmoor, in Peterborough, in Thurrock. They'd be very happy with that, and they're taking lots of seats off the Conservatives. But yes, they are losing some seats as well in places, and we'll probably see a bit more of that tomorrow with Bristol and other places coming in as well. And that is because I think a lot of people are disillusioned on Gaza, yes, but also on some of the U-turns and dilutions we've seen around, say, for example, the Green New Deal policies as well. So Labour does need to have a think about its message and to be a bit bolder, a bit more confident, and give people a reason to vote. People have got a reason not to vote Conservative, and you've seen that with the Conservative voters staying at home, going to Reform, going to the Lib Dems, going to Labour as well, of course, and going to the Greens.
When it comes to the general election, though, Andrew, isn't it actually canny politics what they're doing at the moment? Because they don't have to stack up votes in those kinds of places because they're constituencies where they've got big majorities already.
Yeah, look, they're winning seats from the Conservatives because the Conservatives are doing very badly, and that's been the case for the past 2 years, post Partygate, post Liz Truss, and post the recession that Hunt and Sunak have put us into. So the Conservatives' results have been on the floor for 2 years now, both sets of local elections, and all the by-elections we've had since as well. So yeah, Labour's doing very well, picking up seats from the Conservatives, and that's going to put them over the line in the general election, almost certainly.
And in terms of what next for the Labour Party, do you think that the left is being listened to in the way that you want to? I mean, you've been outlined there a few things. There have been anxieties about whether it was the Middle East or giving up on the £28 billion a year that was promised for spending on green projects.
Yeah, look, I think the left has definitely been deliberately marginalised under Keir Starmer, there's no doubt about that. But I think the reality is the more the Greens do well, I think that will be a bit of a wake-up call for some Labour MPs whose seats may be under threat. We've seen some surprising results, Labour possibly losing the council in Oldham. I mean, I don't think anyone was expecting that at the start of the night. I don't think that's quite confirmed yet, but that seems to be the indications from the count. So it is having some strange ramifications for Labour as well, and they have to inspire people to go and vote for them. They can't just rely on the Conservatives to be terrible, although that does look to be set in stone now. But the real worry for me is when they get into government, they're going to face huge problems with the NHS, with schools, the shortage of teachers, with the economy, flatlining for the last 2 or 3 years. They've got a real mountain to climb to get things turned around, and unless they've got the policies that will turn that around, that disillusion that's currently with the Conservatives could easily switch onto a Labour government. So for me, it's not about winning the next election. That looks fairly safe as it ever can be this far out, but it's about what they do in government when they get there.
And for you, as things stand, yes or no, do they have the policies that they need?
Not quite. They've got some good policies. I mean, the public ownership of rail, the stuff on workers' rights, as long as they stick to it. Even what is still there on the Green New Deal is good and will be an improvement. They just need to put the funding behind it to make sure it actually delivers and they meet their target. Because the worst thing they could do is leave it to the market, not put enough funding in, and people end up paying more on their bills and not seeing the rewards of it, because there's a huge opportunity in the green transition to create good jobs, to reduce people's bills through a combination of home insulation and domestically generated electricity. And if we don't put the funding in to do that, then you will get that disillusion come in, I think. So they do need bolder policies, but if they do that, then they could stay in power for a long time, because the Conservatives are in a real state, as we're seeing tonight.
OK, Andrew Fisher, thank you very much indeed for hanging on. It's good to hear an interesting perspective from a different part in the Labour Party than the one we've heard in the studio here tonight. Jonathan Ashworth, I know you don't have common cause with Andrew Fisher on many issues. He was very much part of Jeremy Corbyn's project, but he said that you have deliberately marginalised the left. He said you don't quite have the policies that you need, and you could see a situation, if you're lucky enough to win the general election, where the disillusionment with the Conservatives just switches over to you. What do you say to that?
Well, I've always gotten very well with Andrew and always listened to him and read his columns in the I newspaper carefully. So I wouldn't want people to feel that there's any issue between us at all. There's not at all.
I'm sure he's grateful for the plug and being nice, but can you answer his question? He's saying you're not doing enough for true believers in the Labour Party.
Look, we do have a transformative agenda. We do want to improve working conditions and make work pay for working people by giving people decent workplace rights and conditions, the right to join trade unions, the right to parental leave. We're going to deal with exploitative zero-hours contracts and so on. It's called the New Deal for Workers. It's a very important part of our programme.
Are you going to water it down? It's been reported this week.
No, we're not going to water it down. In fact, Keir spoke at the USDOR conference, that's the Shop Workers Union, just this week, restating his commitment to the New Deal for workers. Andrew is quite right to talk about our policies to invest in renewable energy sources, which will not only create good, well-paid jobs, good, well-paid unionised jobs across the country, but will also cut energy bills for good. So I do think, actually, there is not this huge chasm that you were trying to suggest between me and Andrew in that respect. I do think we have important policies which I think will excite people in a general election as well.
But it's interesting, what he's saying, though, is that you need to tread carefully, because people who feel Keir Starmer's not giving them enough sort of full-fat Labour might be terribly disillusioned with you very quickly if you are lucky enough to win the general election, if you're not giving them what they really want, if you're not radical enough. You just don't accept that?
Look, no, I'm not sure. Look, we have to win an election. And look, we are having, the results that are coming in so far are good results. But there is a long way to go until a general election. And we are not complacent. We know we've got to fight for every single vote. We know that the next general election is competitive. No matter how badly the Tories do tonight, the next general election will be competitive. It is a fight. And if people want to change the direction of the country after 14 years of the Conservatives, they need to come out and vote Labour. And that's the message we're going to be taking to people in the general election.
OK, well, the general election, as you say, is a long way away. For weeks, a long time in politics, then we might still be some centuries away from the general election. Important to remember, when we all sat here and talking about the local elections in 2017, it looked like Theresa May was on course for a generational landslide. And of course, a few weeks later, she'd actually discovered she'd chucked away her majority. So campaigns change things. Let's take you to the Hull results. Susan told us earlier on that they were holding on there, the Liberal Democrats in Hull, holding off a challenge from Labour. We can confirm the full seats now. The Lib Dems got 31 seats, Labour 26. So not that much in it. None of the other parties scoring, but the Lib Dems slipped one, Labour gained one, but the Lib Dems there will be pleased to have held off the challenge from the Labour Party in that fine northern city up there on the east coast. Let's look at the share. Oh, look, first one of the night where the share is actually the same. It was 44-44, but the change, look, Lib Dems up 5 and Labour up by 9%. So that might give the Lib Dems a few wobbles in terms of how things change, but a victory is a victory. Reeta, now, This is a really interesting one because we've been talking about change in seats in terms of the numbers of changes, but you're going to give us the span across the years.
Absolutely. So these are Rishi Sunak's second set of local elections as Prime Minister, and you can see here that we now have enough information based on 23 of the councils that have been declared to work out what proportion of the vote the Conservatives are losing tonight. And you can see the dotted line there shows that the Conservatives are now on course to be losing 54% of the seats that they were holding. Now, to put this into some sort of perspective, if you go right the way back to 2009, this was under Gordon Brown, and at that point, I can tell you that that represents 62%. So at that point in 2009, Gordon Brown had lost 62%, or I should say the Labour Party under Gordon Brown had lost 62% of the seats that they were holding the previous year. So at the moment, the Conservatives are not on course for something quite as low as that, but that is not going to fill Conservative hearts with joy. Let me show you what that percentage translates as actual seats. So again, this is based on the 23 councils that we've had declared so far. So if the voting patterns continue in the same way, and there's no reason to believe that they shouldn't, because the councils that have declared already are representative of the councils overall in the next couple of days, we are saying that it looks as if the Conservatives are on course to lose 539 seats. So that would be over half of the ones that they were holding as we went into these elections. Labour gaining 278 and the Liberal Democrats on 59. And that, as I say, is on the basis of 23 councils declared.
OK, Rita, thank you very much indeed. And if people weren't watching much earlier in the night, remind us why there is a Prime Minister missing from the top of your very excellent chart.
It's very good that you keep reminding us of this, Laura. So, yes, the keen-eyed among you will see that there was Liz Truss, of course, between Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, and we haven't included her because there were no elections fought during her time as Prime Minister.
OK, Rita, thank you for that clarification. Just in case anybody thought that we were trying to make any kind of point about not including her, there were no local elections during her time in charge, and that's why she is not on the charts. Some more results coming in for you. Let's look at Peterborough. Peterborough is a hung council. Labour has taken 19 seats. Independents have taken 17, with the Tories on 11. But let's show you this. Now, it's particularly interesting because Peterborough is the kind of place where Labour really want to be showing progress before the general election, and the Tories have lost 13 seats in Peterborough. Labour gaining 4, but the Tories losing 13. And there's the share of the vote. The Tories still narrowly ahead with 29% to Labour's 26%, but dropping away by 16%. So that kind of pretty steep drop for the Conservative vote happening also in Peterborough's council election. A rare bright spot for the Tories in a sense. They've held on to Fareham Council in the south of England. That's where the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has their seat. There were some nerves in the Tory party that might disappear. They might lose control, but they have managed to hold on to the council. Let's show you, though, the change in what's happened. The Tories have lost 5 seats, and it's the Lib Dems that have gained 4. So a result there for you from Fareham. And also, I can give you another Police and Crime Commissioner result. In Cumbria, Labour has gained it. They have taken it from the Tories. So the Police and Crime Commissioner, David Allen, takes that job from the Conservative Mike Johnson. Let's take a look at the percentages. 47% for Labour, 30% for the Conservatives. Let's look at the share change, and then I hope you can show you the swing. Labour up 21%, the Tories down 23%. And this is going to be a whopper. There we go, look at that, swing. Now remember, we can't show you swing for local councils, we don't show you that, but for police and crime commissioners, and we'll be able to do the same for Blackpool South. We can look at the swing. 22% going from the Conservatives over to the Labour Party in the contest for the Cumbrian Police and Crime Commissioner. I just want to show you some pictures of what's happening in Redditch, where there is another very competitive count going on. Labour are very hopeful of taking that council there. We were talking to James Pearson, our reporter on the ground, who said that Labour was seeming to be quite cheery, but not able to confirm anything for us yet, although the smaller parties were whispering to him about Labour being able to take that council. So as soon as we've got a result there, we will confirm that for you, if indeed it does come to pass. Now, we spent a lot of time talking already tonight about the Blackpool South by-election, because it's a really important contest, the only by-election of this huge set of results. The Reform Party have been vying with the Tories for second place. Labour is expected to take that seat, perhaps quite comfortably. But let's check in with the leader of the Reform Party, Richard Tice, who joins us from Blackpool. Thanks for hanging on and joining us from the programme. Can you tell us what's going to happen then?
Laura, good morning. It is so close. It is actually too close to call. I'm an optimist, so obviously I hope that we will have just pipped it. But from our perspective, this is an incredible result. It's our best results, by-election results to date. It'll be usefully above our national polling average. And this shows that we're on the rise. The Tories are essentially slipping. And we're rapidly becoming the real opposition. In the north, we had some great results that you referred to earlier in Sunderland, where we beat the Tories in 16 out of 25 wards. So yeah, we're making great progress, and it's too close to call, but I think there'll be a declaration sometime in the next 20 to 30 odd minutes or so.
And you are hopeful, you say, that you will manage to pit the Tories to second place?
We are hopeful, but it is so close. It'll either be just above or just below. But from our perspective, to have made this progress, as I say, it'll be our best by-election result ever. It'll be usefully above our national polling average, and it's onwards and upwards. We've been focusing on getting ready for a general election. We think that could well be in the summer. We'll be ready for it whenever it is, and continuing to make great progress, because frankly, the country's broken, nothing works. We're in the longest recession for 70 years since records began per person. Of course, that's what actually matters. And the truth is, Britain needs reform. Our economy needs reform. Our health system needs reform. And our immigration needs to be frozen. Our immigration system needs reform. So wherever you look, people are actually saying there must be someone out there with some common sense policies. And that's why, as people hear about us, they're saying, I like what I hear, and that's why people are starting to vote for us.
The thing is, Mr. Tice, if you're actually the real opposition, then why haven't you won any council seats so far tonight?
Well, because we've got a first-past-the-post system, and as I say, we've been focusing on the general election. But you know, the results that you referred to in Sunderland, we were getting in some wards 30% plus in those council seats, and we're delighted with that. Rome's not built in a day, but we are making great progress where we're standing. And as I say, this is a serious medium-term project. It's not a one-election pressure group. And yeah, we've been focusing on getting ready for the general. We'll be ready for that. And I think we're going to surprise lots of people on the upside.
But other smaller parties have been making progress. The Greens have been putting on seats. Independents have been gaining seats. And your ancestors, you know, UKIP and the Brexit Party, they often picked up lots of seats at local elections. And you're not doing that so far tonight.
Well, that's because we've been focusing on the general. I mean, UKIP have been around for 20 years. The Greens have been around a long time. And so we're making, as I say, we're making great progress in the parliamentary seats. And actually, you know, you look at the percentages we've got in Sunderland and elsewhere as results get declared. We've also got the mayoral elections. We're excited about how we're going to perform in those relative to the Conservatives. And it's, you know, as I say, Rome's not built in a day, but we are making great progress. And all these results are showing that we're achieving more than our national polling average. And that's an important indicator.
Richard, it's Chris Mason here. Morning to you. You know the critique that you hear from Conservatives that a vote for reform is a vote that will put Keir Starmer into Downing Street. When we look at the results so far where you guys have been standing, you've been doing pretty well, but certainly the critique that can be made from your Conservative opponents is is quite a stinging one, isn't it? And perhaps come a general election where people are picking a government as opposed to councillors, that could have a real impact on you.
No, look, I mean, the two main parties, they're two variants of socialism. High taxes, high wasteful government spending, mass immigration, a failing health system, and it's leading to the longest recession and per person. You know, no one expects the Labour Party to create growth with their plans. We don't know what their plans are. So look, the country doesn't need socialism. That's going to take us towards bankruptcy. You know, we need reform. We've got to change the direction. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no difference between those two parties. And if we keep raising taxes, keep spending government spending badly, we keep having mass immigration, which the Tories brought in completely against what they promised to do, then don't be surprised if they get punished at the polls, and deservedly so.
Jonathan Gullis, he's just called you a socialist. Do you want to answer that, or even answer it to him?
At the end of the day, I think Chris made the point perfectly, which is if you look at the results that have been happening at local councils, a vote for reform will essentially lead to a Labour councillor, will lead to a Labour MP, in my case, Labour opponent in my own seat, who actually tweeted on the day of the Brexit referendum who's praying to London to save him from Brexit. These are the type of people that will be getting elected who do not share the values nor the beliefs of the people of places that I'm proud to represent. And that is the reality of what's being faced. And I do find it bizarre when it comes to immigration that even the Reform Party seem to oppose the Rwanda scheme itself as well, when actually this is something that is very popular with voters on doorsteps, as we see from polling time and time again.
Richard Tice.
Well, it's clearly not a deterrent. I mean, you've had over 7,000 people have come over this year. I think over 1,600 migrants have made the journey since the Rwanda bill received royal assent, which just proves it's not a deterrent. The whole thing is a complete wasteful farce. Everybody knows it is. The only way you'll stop the boats is to pick up and safely take back to France. We know that's what worked. The Belgian authorities are doing it. We see it work in Greece. It's a variant of what works in Australia. We've heard all this stuff. The country is tired of Tories talking the talk but never walking the walk. They're done with it. We're finished with it. We want change.
Jonathan Gullis.
My record's very clear in Parliament. I actually introduced a bill to say we should ignore the European Court of Human Rights, and it was Sir Keir Starmer who walked through the no lobby. It was a 10-minute rule bill. So I've used my parliamentary time to actually be very clear on this issue time and time again. I've got a very proud track record of that, and ultimately it comes to the same thing time and time again, which is what Richard's calling for is not what his own deputy leader was saying on Talk Radio with Julie Hartley-Brewer, who was saying that ultimately he would actually give people new boats in the middle of the English Channel, better boats. Those are words that can be found on video, and I think that would be the most bizarre policy of all.
Richard Tice, do you want to destroy the Tory party?
Look, at the end of the day, competition's a good thing. The Tories are supposed to believe in competition, but because they become socialists, they actually don't. And the country's tired of all this fear-mongering. The country wants some hope. It wants to vote for people that they believe in, who've got real policies, real alternatives that's going to change the course. The country's utterly broken. And if we don't change course, we're heading towards disaster and bankruptcy. And it's the Tories who created this disaster, and they've got to be ousted.
What do you say to that?
Well, actually, at the end of the day, the Conservatives have a very clear plan and working on that plan, which is the deal with France that stops 23,000 vessels coming over. We've got the funding, about £800+ million going to the National Crime Agency to smash apart the smuggling gangs, which is a huge increase from what it was in 2019. We've also got the Rwanda deterrent, which will become that full-fledged deterrent once we get those flights off the ground, which is why we've been battling the lefty lawyers, the Labour Party, and trying to get this through Parliament and through the courts. And I do therefore firmly believe that the public will see that delivery, and you'll see the polls, I think, therefore change significantly as Reform voters will see that we are delivering on this important pledge by the Prime Minister to stop the boats.
Richard Tice, we can see you shaking your head in disagreement with Jonathan Gullis, which is not in and of itself surprising. But I want to ask you a question, though. This time, in the last sort of cycle, your ancestors, the Brexit Party, in the end, stood back to make way for the Conservatives, which gave them a clearer path to their huge majority in the 2019 election. Can you rule out doing that this time?
Indeed, I've done that before with Chris Mason. Delighted to reconfirm 110% that actually we're not doing any deals with the Tories. You know, we trusted them last time and they betrayed that trust, not only to us, but to the British people. They didn't get Brexit done properly. They didn't cut immigration. And people are tired and sick and tired of the Tory incompetence and lies. We're done with it. We're done with the Tories. It's time for change. It's time for reform.
And is Nigel Farage going to come back and help you out? Stand for a seat somewhere?
Well, Everybody's asking that. Look, the clock is ticking towards the general election. The more help Nigel can give, I welcome it, the better. And let's wait and see. But the clock is ticking, that is for sure, particularly if it's a summer election, Laura.
OK, Richard Tice, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Blackpool. And, of course, we will bring you the result in Blackpool as soon as we have it. We expect Labour to win that parliamentary seat. The battle seems to be very intense, according to Richard Tice, too close to call between the Tories and Reform for second place. But we shall see. A result we have had is Stockport Council. Now, it has gone to become... nobody has overall control. It was already being run by the Lib Dems as a minority. They were hopeful of being able to take control of it there. Susan, you're going to leave us in a few minutes, but you were saying to us earlier on, Baroness Kramer, that you hoped you would be able to show progress there in Stockport, but it appears you just have fallen short of holding it, of taking it outright.
Yes,
Are you
but we've got
disappointed?
2 gains against Labour, and in those areas of Cheadle and Hazel Grove that I talked about, we've won the popular vote, which is really important for us in terms of looking forward to the general election. So
and right now
we are pleased. You know, we're pleased with that because, frankly, we've been facing overall a Labour surge, and I think it shows that we can stand up against that.
OK, and it's an interesting seat, Stockport, because right now it's held by a mixture of Conservatives and Labour, and of course you're trying to set the scene there for being able to nab one of them at the general election.
I'd like to nab more than one.
OK, well, ambition is something that all politicians are always full of. We are going to say goodbye to you shortly, Susan, and I believe we're also going to say goodbye to you, Jonathan Ashworth, or Jonathan Guyes.
Yeah.
So one of our Jonathans is going to leave us in a couple of minutes, but not quite yet. I'm going to show you some more pictures of Blackpool South because I'm hoping we might get close to a result there. Somebody is testing a microphone. So that looks promising. While we wait, so we might just keep half an eye on those pictures. Let's talk to Reeta then about what happened in Thurrock. Now, Reeta, that was a big gain for the Labour Party. Forgive me in advance if I stop you in the middle of your numbers, because if there is a result in Blackpool, we'll go straight back there.
I'll shut up immediately. Laura, I've got Thurrock for you. I've got Thurrock, and I've got a bit more of the east of England as well, because it is by and large a story of Labour advancement. Now, in Thurrock, of course, this is a Labour gain. We brought you this a little earlier in the evening, but the results, you know, they came thick and fast. It's good to go over them again. Labour gain on 27 seats, and let's just look at how the seats changed here, and that's very stark, isn't it? The Conservatives losing a full 12 seats, Labour picking them up 8 seats and 4 going to the independents. And this is in a very leavey area. Back in the referendum, it was a 72% leave. So Labour really advancing there. Now, let's take a look at Ipswich, which is a Labour hold on 38 seats, and it's been Labour for quite a while. This was a Labour gain actually over 10 years ago. This is what has happened in terms of seat change, and that again is quite marked, isn't it? Conservatives losing 5, straight swap to Labour. Now, Ipswich has been in the news a lot recently with the defection of Dan Poulter from the Conservatives to Labour. He holds one of the Ipswich seats. The other one is a Conservative-held seat in the House of Commons. And our analysis suggests that based on this pattern of voting, that seat is vulnerable and that Labour could well pick that up in a general election, given what has happened there tonight. One more result to show you overnight. Now, this is Southend-on-Sea. It started the night hung, and it remains hung. But let's just have a look at what happened to the seats. And that's interesting, isn't it? Because, as I said, it's a story of Labour advancement, them picking up 3 seats, the Conservatives losing 4, and the Greens gaining the other 1. So, very interesting picture there in the east of England. And I just wanted to remind you, if you don't already know, you can get all this information on the BBC website. You can put in your postcode, find out what's going on in your own area. That is the address. And of course, you can go to the BBC News app as well. And I got through that without Blackpool South.
You did get through that without Blackpool South. We're going to quickly say goodbye and thank you to Susan Kramer and Jonathan Gullis, thank you very much indeed for joining us and sharing your views and having a good old rammy. Always part of politics. I can show you there what is going on in Blackpool South, where it looks very much like the candidates and their supporters are lining up for some kind of announcement and declaration before too long. And all the classics, the Monster Raving Loony Party, are there in the front row for us as well. Fine British tradition. And there's a baby too at the front. Somewhere at a political event, there's already somebody ready for a baby to kiss when they've got something to celebrate. Chris, as we wait for the result in Blackpool South, remind us why it matters to the Labour Party so much to be able to show a victory there.
Because this is the kind of seat they simply have to win, and they have to win and win significantly. And I think they'll want to make the case that they can win it by a margin that suggests that they might be on track towards winning the general election. Certainly as far as the Labour spin has been concerned in the last day or so around all of this, is that they can say, look, this is a Westminster by-election contest where people are thinking about electing an MP and therefore thinking of it through the prism of Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, rather than necessarily, as far as a local council election might be concerned, with other concerns being significant. Now, it's yet another by-election, a by-election in this instance triggered by the departure of a Conservative MP or former Conservative MP under something of a cloud. It's not been the first time that's happened in the last couple of years. We've seen Labour and Keir Starmer really campaigning pretty hard in Blackpool South. The Conservatives have been pretty expecting of defeat there for some time, and Labour pretty optimistic about winning there for some time. And it looks like, doesn't it, we are inching ever closer towards.
So yeah, forgive me if I interrupt you.
From the stage.
There has been so many by-elections though in the recent times.
Yeah.
I mean, one MP said to me, it's like we're trying to have a general election in slow motion and it just keeps getting worse rather than getting on with it. It was a Conservative MP, one of those, not a huge number, but a significant number, who believes they should just get on with it and have an election as soon as they can. Remind us then also why we were just speaking to Richard Tice, who believes that they might have managed to make it into second place. If they do manage to make it into second place, do you think if we couple that together with what looked like very bad council losses for the Conservatives, how do you think that would change the calculations for Conservative MPs who are worried for their own jobs, as they do, and worried for the sake of the party?
It's heebie-jeebies territory, I think, for Conservative MPs, if that was to play out. If we see Reform finishing second in Blackpool, alongside how they have been performing in places like Lincolnshire in that Police and Crime Commissioner election, also in Sunderland too earlier in the evening. Now, Conservatives will make the point, hang on, let's wait for Friday and Saturday to play out, and plenty of those mayoral contests still to come. But when you look at the proportion of seats that the Conservatives are losing at this stage, that they are defending, north of 50%, that would suggest if that kind of proportion of loss was to continue throughout the day and throughout tomorrow, and that's an if, of course, that would be a greater proportion of losses than they sustained in their worst ever year back in 1995. And for that reason, I go back to my point about the heebie-jeebies that would provoke, I suspect, amongst Conservatives, because it would look very bleak for them.
It would look very bleak indeed. And, you know, we have had such extraordinary turmoil in the Conservative Party, no doubt about it. Some of them think the idea of trying to do something as radical as say, OK, time for yet another leader, if Westminster chaos has been the problem, more Westminster chaos is certainly not the solution. And yet there are others who take a very different view. I mean, one former minister said to me today, this is the moment, as in, this is the moment we're going to have to do it, or we're going to have to put up and shut up.
Yes, there's no doubt when you speak to Conservatives with all sorts of views about the leadership, they have, plenty of them said, for the last couple of months actually, that this moment, these set of elections, would be their last chance to make a decision on whether they were going to do something nuclear. In other words, contemplate removing yet another Prime Minister.
Well, the Conservative activists there are just gathering. They look like they're trying to put a bit of a brave face on it. But the candidate, David Jones, must be somewhere there among them, or often in these things Obviously, candidates, in fact, David Jones has just been taken off. I was just about to say what happens is the candidates get taken off to be told the results first.
That looks like it's happened.
My studio guests will introduce you to a second, nodding along here, knowing what that routine feels like. Candidates get taken off to be told the result, for good or for ill. For somebody who is about to become an MP, it's about to be an absolutely life-changing moment. For somebody also who might be about to lose their job, it's another life-changing moment of a different sort. Hard to underestimate, really, the sort of personal dramas behind all of this as we talk about the big picture and the political jigsaws and all the rest.
Into the mix as well.
Exactly. But we must, it does seem now that the result there is imminent. If the candidates are being taken off, that suggests they are about to be told the result. And then, of course, the declaring officer will then tell all of us. But as you were saying there, this sort of moment of decision for Tory backbenchers.
Yeah, as they try and calibrate the kind of psychology of a set of results, of which there's plenty more to come in the next 48 hours or so, relative to how they might have perceived them to be, and then weigh up whether or not they want to do something very radical. Did I hear a returning officer there?
Sounds like a microphone test. Let's just listen in for a second and check it's not a declaration. I think it's a microphone test, so carry on.
and therefore work out what they might want to do. Now, when I was speaking to some people in the last 24, 48 hours within the Conservative Party who are of the view, and it's a minority view as things stand, that they might want to do something radical and try and remove the Prime Minister, they were saying this is the last chance to do it. The data of the next 48 hours will determine those sort of mindsets. Now, as things stand, the numbers are looking pretty bleak for the Conservatives, but plenty are attaching a lot of psychology to the mayoral results still to come, not least the ones in Tees Valley and the West Midlands.
Let's talk to Helen Catt, who's on the ground for us in Blackpool South for us tonight. Helen, we've just seen the Conservative candidate be taken off. We assume to be told the result. Can you give us a heads up?
Yeah, sure. So it's gone very quiet here, actually. People have clustered around where they're going to do the declaration because all of the candidates have now been taken off to a table in the centre of the room here. They've just been told the provisional result. I think they're just starting to move away now. I can see them all coming this way. So we are expecting, we think, that we might get a result fairly shortly. I'm just trying to sort of get eyes on where they're all going. There are still a couple of candidates in the middle talking to the returning officer.
But no, that now seems to Chris Webb, who's the Labour candidate there. If I could just stop you for a second, Helen. I think that's Chris Webb, the Labour candidate, just moving through the back of the shot. Perhaps you can pan along. And there's the Conservative candidate, David Jones. The Labour candidate there, the taller chap with the beard behind him, Chris Webb, son of a postman. Local Blackpool man, has run several charities in the area, and there they go, perhaps taking to the stage. Maybe it's a long walk to the stage, but there are the two main candidates and the Munster Raving Looney candidate obviously next to them. But after a long wait, let's listen in to the result of the by-election for Blackpool South. Just waiting for another one or perhaps two of the candidates to make their way, gathering alongside. You see there one of the 9 candidates standing there. You can see the Green candidate just there, and on the right of your shot, the man who is likely to become the next MP for Blackpool South, Labour candidate Chris Webb. But let's listen into the declaration and hear the result. Remember, listening out particularly for what's happened with the Reform Party, but the Reform candidate, Mark Butcher, is not yet there in that lineup. We spoke to him a couple of hours ago, and he said he was hopeful of pipping the Tories into second place. Richard Tice, the leader of Reform, told us it was too close to call. There he is. Here we go.
Good morning, everybody. We've now got the results for the Blackpool South constituency. I, Neil Jack, Acting Returning Officer for the Blackpool South constituency, declare that the total number of votes for each candidate is as follows. Black, Stephen Justin, commonly known as Stephen, Independent, 163. Butcher, Mark Anthony, Reform UK, 3,101. Cregan, Andrew Kevin, Liberal Democrat, 387. Hope Alan, commonly known as Howling Lord, the official Munster Raving Looney Party, 121. Jones David, the Conservative Party candidate, 3,218. Knight Kim Sherry, Alliance for Democracy and Freedom, 147. Sharp Damon Lee, New Open Non-Political Organised Leadership, 45. Thomas Benjamin Scott, commonly known as Ben, Green Party, 368. Webb Christopher Paul, commonly known as Chris, Labour Party, 10,825. The number of ballot papers rejected is as follows. Did not bear the official mark 0.
And Labour has been victorious in the Blackpool South by-election. Chris Webb has been elected as the new MP for Blackpool South, winning the seat for the Labour Party after Scott Benton, the former Conservative, quit in disgrace. Crucially, though, the Conservatives just managing to hold off the Reform Party with only 117 votes in it. But let's listen then to the new MP for Blackpool South, Chris Webb, as he takes to the microphone now and takes his cheers from his supporters.
The people of Blackpool South have spoken for Britain. They have said to Rishi Sunak and to the Conservatives they've had enough. They've had enough for 14 years of the Conservatives being in power. They have lost trust of the British people, and Blackpool has had enough of this failed government, which has crashed the economy, destroyed our public services and put up taxes. They have said that it's time for change, and that change started here in Blackpool tonight. Only Labour offers new hopes for towns like Blackpool. We need change, and we will get it under a Labour government. I want to thank the returning officer, my election agent, Liam Didsbury, election staff and the police for the smooth running of this election and count. I know it takes a lot of work to put this on, so I thank you for your professionalism, your commitment to the democratic process. I'd also like to thank my entire campaign team and the wider Labour movement. Blackpool South is the 23rd parliamentary by-election of this Parliament, and it's down to each and every one of you for your sacrifices that have made sure we've turned Blackpool South red once again. And thank you to my amazing family who have given me endless support over the years, and to my incredible wife Portia for all her support and sacrifices she's made, especially in these last few weeks, and looking after our newborn son Killian. And thank you to my mum, dad and sister watching in Australia who have supported me all these years. Above all, though, I'd like to thank the people of Blackpool South who have put their trust in me to be the next Member of Parliament. It's a huge privilege to represent the seat that I call home and have been born and bred in, where we've not had a local MP for 60 years. The circumstances that led to this by-election have been well documented. I believe many people in Blackpool have been left with little faith in politicians because of the behaviour of others. To them I say I'm humbled by your support, that every ward in this town voted for me. Whether you voted for me or not though, I promise to work for you every day to earn your trust and restore the faith in politics. I promise I won't let you down. I have said this all along, that I am in it for Blackpool, and I mean it. I will put the priorities of this town first and fight for residents in Westminster and challenge this government to get a better deal for Blackpool. I have spoken to so many during this campaign and had the same conversations. People are fed up because nothing seems to work anymore, hard up because of the Conservative cost of living crisis, but instead of giving up, they got up and voted for change with Labour. It is not acceptable that Blackpool has the highest crime rate in Lancashire, with neighbourhood police officers cut by 43%.
That's all right, then.
It's not acceptable that the Conservatives allowed some parts of our town to be run down without a plan to rejuvenate them, and it's not acceptable that in Blackpool South in parts, more children live in poverty because of the decisions this government have made. People in Blackpool South and across the country are sick of the government's failure and to tackle the big issues facing our country. In this election, we offered a plan for Blackpool that was positive, a plan to put more police on the streets, deliver the regeneration our town needs and help hard-working families through the cost of living crisis. Only Keir Starmer's Labour Party has the vision and the ideas to make life better for everyone in our country. Change is what people want, and up and down the country, Labour is the party they're looking for to deliver it. Blackpool South has said that loud and clear tonight. The message to the Prime Minister is that we need a general election, sooner the better. People no longer trust the Conservatives. Prime Minister, do the decent thing, admit you've failed and call a general election. Give the people of Britain the same opportunity people in Blackpool South have, a Labour Member of Parliament and Keir Starmer in Downing Street. And let Labour get on with delivering the change the people of Britain want and deserve. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you to the people of Blackpool South.
Chris Webb there, the new Labour MP for Blackpool South, thanking his family, thanking his supporters and giving a direct message to the Prime Minister, saying, do the decent thing, Rishi Sunak, admit that you have failed. Change starts here in Blackpool, he said. Chris Webb there chatting to the losing candidate from the Conservatives, David Jones, who now appears to be leaving the count. Chris Webb there speaking in the wake of his victory in Blackpool South, a decisive victory for the Labour Party there. Let's take you through some of the numbers. Labour's Chris Webb polling 10,825 votes, well ahead of the Conservatives. Remember, the seat was previously held by the Tories. David Jones on 3,218 votes. But look how that was only just ahead of the Reform Party, who's balloted 3,101 votes. And that's really where the tension has been there all night. Would Reform manage to beat off the Tories into second place? They failed, but only just. And that will send jitters through some Conservatives. Let's look at how the share of the vote changed, because this is really important. Labour got 59%, a whopping share of the vote, so far ahead of the Tories on 18%, Reform on 17%. And the change, we'll look at that, the Tories falling away by 32%. And the swing, your favourite bit, I know, whichever way it's going, Tories to Labour, 26%. And that is the second biggest swing achieved by Labour in this Parliament. Only the Wellingborough by-election was more decisive for them. And in fact, that's the third biggest swing to Labour at a by-election since World War II. So, very decisive. Big cheers for Labour in Blackpool South. Big welcome to Chris Fox for the Lib Dems, and also to Angela Richardson, one of the other deputy chairs of the Conservative Party. Welcome to you. Jonathan Ashworth, the Labour Party, is still here. Well, you look like the Cheshire Cat. You said at the beginning you were a pussy cat, but you look like the cat that got the cream now.
Well, I mean, that is a result that sparkles as brightly as Blackpool's illuminations, doesn't it? That is an absolutely brilliant result for Chris. I'm absolutely made up for him. But that swing is huge. And I think that does reveal that after 14 years of failure, people have had enough of this Conservative government, this failing Conservative government. Look, I mean, yes, the circumstances of the election were about a Tory MP who got caught up in scandal, but nonetheless, that result suggests to me that the country wants change, the people of Blackpool clearly want change and have voted for change tonight, and that momentum is with the Labour Party.
Angela Richardson, what do you say to that?
Well, congratulations to Chris Webb, and the result was not unexpected. I think, given the circumstances that caused the by-election in the first place, you know, it was always going to be difficult for the Conservatives. I think what's interesting in looking at the difference between the Conservatives and Reform, it just shows what we do in every election. They will have worked hard for weeks, but it's on polling day when you are knocking up your supporters that you have to keep going until 10 o'clock at night to make sure you can get every vote.
But a Reform Party that hasn't won a single council seat, they don't have a single Westminster seat, they're basically sort of challengers who are working as hard as they can. They nearly beat you, the most established party in this country, and there was only 117 votes in it. You must be petrified about that.
Well, I would look at the turnout of this election. It's 32%. In a normal general election, you'd be looking at least double that.
So their supporters are much more enthusiastic than yours, Jan. Yours stayed at home and Reform got theirs out.
Well, I think we've seen in the polling over quite a while now that there are a lot of don't knows and there are a lot of Conservatives who haven't made up their mind.
But hang on, here we have
do.
real votes, OK? And you have the Reform Party were on 17%, the Tories just on 18%. Now, do you accept if that kind of pattern were to be replicated, that could deny you dozens and dozens of seats across the country at the general election where things are tight? That could evoke huge damage on you.
I think in the context of this by-election, I wouldn't expect to see that pattern replicated. This is a very particular set of circumstances. And voters in all of the by-elections that I've been and campaigned in, they are really across when they're dragged to the polls outside of a general election in circumstances like this. So I've got full understanding and sympathy with Conservative voters who decided tonight in Blackpool South to stay at home.
You've got sympathy for them. Do you want to say sorry to them about what happened with the former MP?
I think it's up to him to apologise for the actions that he took. I think that the actions that he took were wrong, and colleagues agreed with me, and he went through the proper standards process, and Parliament made its decision on that.
OK, Angela, we'll have more from you a bit later, but let's go straight to John Curtice then. John, looking at these numbers, the implications of that, what does the Blackpool South result suggest to you?
Well, I must admit, I do have a certain amount of sympathy for a Conservative spokesman who has to turn up at 4:30 in the morning, and the first thing you have to deal with is a result like this. But to be honest, I don't think that the result can be explained away in the way it's suggested. First of all, let's talk about the turnout. Yes, the turnout is down on the general election, but actually the fall in turnout at 26 points is rather less than the fall in turnout that occurred in a number of the other by-elections in which the Conservatives suffered swings against them of over 20%. And the second thing to point to make, this is not an isolated case that you can explain away by the particularities of the way in which this by-election was occasioned. This is now the 5th by-election in this Parliament in which the swing from Conservative to Labour is over 20 points. And as you've already pointed out, it's the third biggest swing from Conservative to Labour in any post-war by-election. When was the last time we got swings with any degree of regularity of this kind of size? And even then, not as many as we've now had in this Parliament, while it was the Parliament of 1992 to 1997, and we know how that ended. I think the only thing that's stopped this result from being basically an unmitigated disaster for the Conservatives was the fact they just narrowly squeaked ahead of Reform, for whom, yes, this was their best result in a by-election, but in truth it's still well short of the kind of figures that UKIP were getting in by-elections between around 2012 and 2014. Yeah, even though, as it were, the challenge from Reform is not as great to the Conservatives as the challenge from UKIP was when David Cameron was in 10 Downing Street, yet they are still suffering consistently now these very, very high swings against them. I'm afraid, you know, so far tonight we've been quite measured and we're saying, well, maybe the Conservatives are a bit worse than they were last year, etc., etc. But here, in a sense, is further very clear and, of course, much more dramatic evidence that basically the project that Rishi Sunak is meant to be there to achieve, which is to narrow the gap on Labour, that project still has yet to provide any visible benefit.
OK, John, thank you so much. We'll be back with you a bit later in the programme because we are hurtling towards the 5 o'clock news. After that, we'll get analysis of that result from Chris Mason, of course, who's here with us. But before we do that, we're going to say goodbye and thank you to Jonathan Ashworth for being here. You look so delighted to have been able to end your appearance with that result. But we will be miraculously replacing you with your colleague Jo Stevens. But we thank you for your time. Chris Fox will speak to you for the Liberal Democrats a bit later on. And Angela Richardson, you're also staying with us. Before we go to Regina with the news, a last glimpse at 5 a.m. of where the totals are in terms of council seats right now, in addition to that Blackpool by-election result. You can see there, Labour on 274, having gained 56. 94 for the Conservatives, having lost 107. The Lib Dems gaining 12 on 90. Independents having a healthy night, gaining 28 to be 53. The Greens, also with reason to be chipper, gaining 11 seats, putting them on 19. And the Residents' Associations, that's what RA stands for, they're with 5 seats. Oh, the Lib Dems have just gained another one and the Tories have just lost another one. See, it happens in real time, as if by magic. Now, though, it's time for the news with Regina Vajanathan.
Thanks, Laura. Now, in the last few minutes, Labour have resoundingly won the by-election in Blackpool South, with Chris Webb becoming its new MP. The contest was triggered by the resignation of the former MP, Conservative Scott Benton. Meanwhile, the first wave of results are being declared in local elections in parts of England. The Conservatives have lost control of North East Lincolnshire Council and have seen councillors ousted across the country, as Labour have gained key councils in Hartlepool, Rushmoor and Thurrock. So far, there's been an increase in Green and Independents becoming councillors in this, the last major test of public opinion before the general election. Our political correspondent Damien Grammaticus has been following the night's developments.
Chris, Labour Party, 10,825.
Blackpool South, a little before 5 a.m, and a decisive Labour victory. They were confident of emerging winners in the by-election, but this was emphatic.
They have said to Rishi Sunak and to the Conservatives, they've had enough. They've had enough for 14 years of the Conservatives being in power. They have lost trust of the British people, and Blackpool has had enough of this failed government.
The Conservatives, who had held the seat, were beaten into second place, but the shock for Tories will be that Reform very nearly pushed them into third.
They didn't get Brexit done properly, they didn't cut immigration, and people are tired and sick and tired of the Tory incompetence and lies. We're done with it. We're done with the Tories. It's time for change. It's time for reform.
And the first council of the night to change control, Hartlepool.
Q&A at Bailey Fleet, Labour and Cooperative Party, 649 votes.
The Conservatives lost 6 councillors here, Labour in charge again. The win is symbolic for them, clawing back lost ground.
We have worked so hard to get the trust of the people in Hartlepool back to Labour, and I think that's probably what's done it tonight.
Day, Thomas William, Labour Party, 806.
In Rushmoor in Hampshire, Labour have taken control directly from the Conservatives. Boundary changes helped here, but it's also been gaining wards from Tories. Mounting losses, an unwelcome sight for the Conservative minister at the count. And in North East Lincolnshire, more Labour cheer.
Wow.
Conservatives lost control of the council here. Grimsby is exactly the sort of place Labour will hope to win back at the general election.
Sadly, in local elections, they tend to mirror the polls at national level, and clearly it's a statement of the obvious. We're far behind in the polls nationally, and people have followed through at local level.
In Hull, an alarm and an evacuation. Whether Conservatives think these elections signal trouble ahead for them will depend on the scale of any losses. But there are warning signs for Labour too. This is Oldham. In some areas with substantial numbers of Muslim voters, Labour are struggling to hold on to support. And elsewhere, the Greens have been picking up votes, often at Labour's expense.
Voters are really, really sick of this Conservative government and the way they've run this country into the ground over the last 14 years, but they're not really feeling inspired by what Keir Starmer's Labour Party is offering.
In Stockport, where they're counting in a car park, Liberal Democrats could make gains from Labour. But what they're most focused on are the places they face off with Conservatives.
We're expecting to see gains, we're expecting to see good progress, but specifically in the areas where we hope to win parliamentary seats.
And I do hereby declare that Carol Ann Shevlin-Ney is duly elected.
So the picture emerging is one of Labour chalking up gains, Conservatives slipping back, and smaller parties winning support from both of them. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News.
Now to the United States, and police have continued to arrest protesters on university campuses who've been demonstrating against the war in Gaza. There have been further clashes between police and protesters in a number of cities, including here at Portland State University in Oregon, as well as in Washington, D.C. The pro-Palestinian demos have spread to around 50 institutions, with more than 2,000 people arrested across the US in the past fortnight. President Biden has said that he'll defend the right to free speech, but that order must prevail.
Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest. Threatening people, intimidating people, instilling fear in people is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law.
Turkey says it's stopping all trade with Israel over the war in Gaza, citing the worsening humanitarian situation in the Palestinian territory. The country said all imports and exports would be suspended until Israel's government allowed an uninterrupted and sufficient flow of aid. Trade between the two countries was worth almost £5.6 billion last year. Israel's Foreign Minister Israel Katz has accused Turkey's President Erdogan of behaving like a dictator. Apple's seen its biggest fall in sales in more than a year. The tech giant saw a sharp drop in demand for its most important product, the iPhone, with sales of the device dropping by 10% from January to March compared with the previous year. Executives said the figures were distorted by COVID-related supply disruptions, which led to unusually strong sales during the same period last year. The King and Queen have been presented with the official document recording their coronation almost a year after the service at Westminster Abbey. For 700 years, monarchs have been given what's called a coronation roll, a manuscript of their crowning moment. The 21-metre-long document's taken a calligrapher 56 days to write. Queen Camilla said she'd need her specs to read it. The troubled Co-op Live Arena in Manchester says it's taking a short pause and will now open on the 14th of May. Take That have become the latest act to move shows away from the venue, which has been plagued by delays to its opening. Ticket holders turned up on Wednesday night to find it's still closed due to technical problems. Well, a reminder that you can follow all of the election results on the BBC News website or on the app. You can also see who's won and where using our postcode checker, which is at bbc.co.uk/news or the app. Now let's return to Laura and the team who are still going on Elections 2024.
A very warm welcome back to Election Night on the BBC. We are with you for just under another hour until we'll hand you to our colleagues at BBC Breakfast at 6 o'clock. Let's take you straight to our tally of where the parties have got to in terms of council seats that have been racking up in the last couple of hours. You can see there Labour has gained 59 seats. The Conservatives have lost 112. The Lib Dems have gained 13. And as things stand, that suggests in the big picture that the Conservatives are on course to lose more than half of the seats that they have been defending, which would lead us to roughly Lim losing about 500 seats. So that is at the worst end of their expectations. I should, though, caveat, there are a couple of days until we have all the results coming through. So where we are now looks very bad for the Conservatives, but it is by no means the end of the story. What they have, however, definitively lost out on is the Blackpool South constituency. There is a new Labour MP there, Kuenssberg, and we will be speaking to him in just a few minutes. There he is. brand new MP who will be on his way to Westminster shortly. We'll hear also from his colleague, Joe Stevens, the Shadow Wales Secretary, who's just joined us, and Angela Richardson, Deputy Chair of the Conservatives, is here, and Lord Chris Fox, Liberal Democrat, and we'll talk to our political guests here in the panel soon. In the last couple of minutes, Chris, Blackpool South, big gain for Labour. Redditch Council, much smaller, but a similar thing. They'll be delighted to be able to show that they've won that too. So what's your take on where things have got to?
So, last half hour, two big results in both Redditch and Blackpool South. So, Blackpool is the kind of seat that Labour needed to win. It's a seat that they held between 1997 and 2019, but it's flitted between the two big parties over the last 50 or 60 years. What is striking about it is not so much Labour's victory, but the scale of it, a 26% swing. Absolutely whopping swing there, and just the kind of thing you'll hear Labour folk talking about in the coming hours in terms of where they need to be, in fact well beyond where they would need to be come a general election. Other key thing I think to tease out of the by-election results, Reform UK coming within a whisker of beating the Conservatives into second place. That matches a pattern that we've seen throughout the night in the places where Reform have been standing, albeit a limited number of places, and broadly the kind of places where they ought to do relatively well. But their capacity, it would seem, you can never get into the minds of an individual voter, but to eat disproportionately into Conservative votes is something I suspect that will alarm Conservative MPs. And the scale of their losses, Conservatives, as you were just touching on, across the council elections so far, definitely at the worst end of their expectations. As things stand, they're on track to do as badly, or perhaps worse, in proportionate terms as in 1995, which was their worst ever local election result, a couple of years out from losing a general.
And in the unlikely event that there's anybody at 12 minutes past 5 watching this who doesn't know why the jockeying for position between Reform and the Conservatives was so important in Blackpool South, the Reform Party, of course, comes out of what was left of the Brexit Party, which was what was left of UKIP. Why will Conservatives be so worried about that kind of level pegging with the Reform Party?
The key reason is exactly what we heard from Richard Tice, the leader of Reform, on this programme, about half an hour, 40 minutes ago. Reform are absolutely of the view that they are not going to go easy come the general election. Last time round, we saw their predecessor ease back. They are insisting that they won't, and so that's why it could have a real impact for them. OK,
Chris, thank you very much indeed. Right, let's talk to another Chris. Chris Webb, the new MP for Blackpool South. Congratulations on your win. Welcome to BBC election night. You sounded delighted, but you also, in your speech, you sent a direct message to the Prime Minister.
Yes, it's time that he, admitted that he'd failed and called a general election.
Do you think that's realistically going to happen, though?
Well, that's what the people of Blackpool South have asked for tonight.
Is it really what they asked for, though, or weren't they choosing Labour because the Conservative MP there had left in disgrace, had let them down by being caught out, breaking the rules, and was punished then by Parliament?
No, the people in Blackpool South have been fed up with this government now for 14 years. They've seen how our town has changed. Everyone is worse off than they were, and they want a general election and a Labour government who's on their side.
What issues were people then raising with you during the campaign? I know you're a Blackpool man, born and bred. I know also you had your first child during the campaign. That happened to many people who become MPs. But what were the issues that voters were raising with you?
The cost of living crisis was a big thing on the doorstep. So many working families are now struggling to make ends meet, and they need action on that. Crime and antisocial behaviour has run rampant across Blackpool. They want to see police out on the beat tackling that crime, and they also want decent, well-paid jobs and the high streets rejuvenated. They were the type of things that were coming up on the doorstep, and that's what I've pledged to support as the Member of Parliament.
And the swing that you achieved there of, 26%, as Chris Mason was saying, was absolutely whopping. I mean, a huge move from the Conservatives to the Labour Party. But from what you've said in your speech, from what you've been saying us tonight, how much do you attribute your win just to people being fed up with the Tories rather than what you were saying instead?
We ran an incredibly positive campaign. We were engaging with the public. Many a time on the doorstep, people were telling me I'm the only person that they've seen canvassing and only saw Labour Party in this by-election. They want change, and that's why they voted in record numbers tonight.
And why do you think so many people chose the Reform Party? I mean, more than 3,000 voters, they're not necessarily all Conservative-minded people. Why do you think there was such a big presence for them?
You'd have to ask Conservative voters how they went. We focused on the issues, we focused on a positive campaign. Yes, we have had scandal on the Foul Coast here with 3 Conservative MPs being under investigation, but we ran a positive campaign on the issues, and that's what people backed in this by-election.
And Chris, what's the first thing you're going to do when you get to Westminster, do you think?
Oh, sorry, can you just repeat that again?
What's the first thing do you think you'll do when you get to Westminster in your brand new job?
We've got to highlight the cost of living crisis. People in Blackpool are really struggling. Working families can't put food on the table. We need, one of my first jobs is to highlight that of this government that are sucked in with the Westminster bubble and then demand a general election.
OK, Chris Webb, well, congratulations to you on winning your by-election, and thank you for speaking to us this evening on the BBC Election Results programme. Now, Reeta, that was one big result for the Labour Party. Tell us about another.
Redditch, which has just come in the last few moments. You remember we started the night looking at councils to watch, and Reading was top of the list. Redditch was top of the list. Sorry, it's after 5 in the morning. There it is in the West Midlands. It's a big gain for Labour, this. They've got it from the Conservatives. They've got a 15-seat majority, 21 seats to Labour, 5 to the Conservatives and 1 to the Greens. And I can show you the change in the seats. There you go. The Conservatives losing 11 seats. Now, they had a 3-seat majority before this election. Now, Labour have got a 15-seat majority. They've gained 10 seats and the Greens have got 1. So, a really a victory there that they'll be very, very pleased about. Here are some other results so far, and we've picked out the ones where there have been a change of hands. So Hartlepool, a Labour gain from no overall control. North East Lincolnshire is a Conservative loss. That's now a hung council. Labour have gained Thurrock from no overall control, and they've gained Redditch, as I've just said, and Rushmoor in Hampshire from the Conservatives. Let's take a look at where this leaves us now in terms of councillors overall. The Labour Party have gained 57 councillors. The Conservatives lost 115. The Lib Dems gained 14. Independents having a good night on 32. And the Greens also having a good night on plus 12. Laura.
Thank you very much indeed, Rita. We are able to stack up more and more of the numbers as things come in. Just in the last couple of moments, another result to tell you about, and another, what seems to be unusual, bright spot for the Tories, a very tightly fought place, Harlow Council, not far north of London. The Tories have managed to hold on by 1 seat. 17 seats for the Conservatives, 16 for Labour. A big straight fight between the Tories and the Labour Party there. You can see the Tories went down by 5, but Labour won only 5, and as such, the Tories have managed to hold on in Harlow. Well, they'll be very, very relieved by that. It's the kind of seat where Labour really wanted to make gains. They have made gains, but they have not made enough gains to be able to take control of the council. So, relief for the Tories in a sense, but still seeing Labour on the march in that part of the world. Welcome to you, Joe Stevens, and to you, Chris Fox. We haven't been able to have a word with you yet. Chris Fox for the Liberal Democrats. But Joe, I must firstly come to you on that result in Blackpool South and Redditch. You must be delighted.
Oh, absolutely stunning results. I'm so pleased for Chris Webb. He's been a fantastic candidate. He ran such a positive campaign. I campaigned up there with him. And it was just so good to see people really respecting what he had to offer and being enthusiastic about it. They really wanted change. And Redditch, again, it's a bellwether constituency. Whoever wins Redditch wins the general election. That's what history shows us. So we're really, really pleased.
So you're going to win the general election?
Well, if Redditch is anything to go by, but, obviously it's a great result for us along with the other councils that we've gained tonight.
Angela, you'll have been relieved to hold on in Harlow.
Yes.
But it's looking pretty grisly, isn't it?
Well, I think, we're disappointed with the results, and, it's just awful for those councillors who have been working their socks off for local people on local issues to lose their seats. But I think for any of your viewers who are waking up now, the context of these elections is important. If we look back to 2021, where the Conservatives were at 40% in the polls, where we had just come out of the second lockdown, 60% of the population had had their first vaccine, and there really was a sense of optimism, I think, then. And, you know, I say a week is a long time in politics. I think the last couple of years seem like decades.
But isn't exactly that the point? So much has changed since then. These results are people reflecting on the situation they are in here and now. And you can't just write that off by saying, oh, in 2021 things were very different. Everyone knows where things were very, very different. This is a reflection from the public on you right now.
It was unusually
and it's not a pretty
point for a government that had been in power for 11 years at that point. It was a very unusually high watermark. So we were expecting to sort of see reductions in the number of seats, and that's obviously playing out tonight. But as we also said, these results have got to run for another couple of days yet. You know, things may look slightly different over the course of the next couple of days.
They may.
And one of the things I would say is two things, actually. One is turnout. It's not the same as it would be in a general election. Only half the people are voting at the moment that would normally vote. And the other thing that I would say is that some people will have voted a couple of weeks ago with postal votes. There's definitely been a bit of a change in tempo from the government, some really positive announcements coming out that have been well received. And I think we are starting to see that
well, hang on,
the economy
there was a national poll this morning that put Rishi Sunak on his worst ever poll rating, below Liz Truss, after those announcements that you've just mentioned.
But I think we're going to see in the coming week, we're going to get more data on inflation. There's a prediction that we're going to get a little bit closer to that 2% target that the Bank of England needs to get to, where we should be. We'll see the Bank of England starting to make some noises on where interest rates are going. And with the national insurance cuts, people are starting to feel that they have a little bit more spending power, and that makes a big difference.
OK, Chris Fox, what do you make of that?
Well, that was a bravura performance of whistling in the dark, hoping that things might be better tomorrow and Saturday. Please don't hold out too much hope, because it's quite clear the electorate have made up their mind. And in Blackpool, congratulations to the Labour Party, that's a great victory, but we've seen it right across by-elections. The electorate decide who's going to beat the Conservatives, and they vote for them. And Labour have picked up 5 seats with huge swings. We've picked up 4 seats with huge swings, and I'd remind you that the North Shropshire swing was 34% to the Lib Dems. This is really huge swings away from the government, and it's very clear that the people have decided that it's time to end the Conservative government. It's just up to the Conservatives to decide when that moment is going to be.
And I think what Angela said, you know, that kind of scene that you set, I think that's part of the problem for the Conservatives, because this is not how people feel. You know, they don't feel like things are getting better. They actually feel like things are getting worse. And to keep saying, as Rishi Sunak does every week, oh, you know, everything's fine, it's all going great, that's not how people feel every day.
I mean, inflation coming down doesn't actually mean that their bills are getting less. It means they're just rising more slowly.
Angela, what do you say to them? Basically, they're saying, look, you've got your fingers in your ears, you don't want to listen to what the country's telling you.
Well, it was interesting. I've been doing this all night, and I was on a BBC Radio panel with Faisal Islam, who was saying that actually there is one measure now where people are saying they are feeling better off, and that is in their personal finance. So, you know, there is a change. It is happening. And the reason that Labour and the Lib Dems want to call a general election now is because they know that things are improving, and they do not want the Prime Minister to wait. Because I think they think, because of the polls, they'll be better off going to a general election now rather than in the autumn or the second half of the year, as the Prime Minister has said.
But do you really think that what's happening with the economy is going to turn to such an extent that you're going to be able to push back these kinds of big political movements that we've been seeing tonight? That you're really going to be able to change national poll leads of 20 points? And we had Faisal on our show earlier as well, and he was saying, you know, there may be some slightly better data. This is not suddenly people are going to put the taps on and milk and honey are going to flow out.
So in these local elections, the Blackpool South election aside, votes are splitting everywhere, and that's what they do in local elections. As you get closer to a general election, people start to make decisions, and historically we have always seen the polls tighten in every election. This just happens as a matter of course. When people know they have to make a decision between either Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak, they will make that decision. It's not about reform. It's not about the Liberal Democrats, who I face in Guildford. It is about choosing who runs the country.
Well, the other two are rolling their eyes, so I want to bring you in a sec. But I just want to ask you one thing before we move on. The point about this is not mid-term. We're not halfway through a government that takes a few knocks because people get a bit fed up, and then as you get closer to a general election, suddenly things do start to narrow and turn. We're months from a general election. Everyone knows that. Some of your colleagues are pushing quite hard to have the general election next month or in July.
But this is not like any other parliamentary term that we've seen in recent history. We have had
because you've had 3 prime ministers.
No, because we've had a once in 100 years global pandemic. We've had war with Ukraine. We've had spike in energy bills. We have spent £407 billion protecting people's lives and livelihoods. We've spent £150 billion trying to help people with their energy costs. This is not normal. This has not been a normal time. It's taken quite a while to see inflation come down from 11.1% to 3.2%, but we're on the right track.
Chris.
Let's look at a similar situation. Straight after World War II, which was unprecedented for people's lives, what happened? It wasn't a thank you to the government. It wasn't anything like that. They actually voted in a Labour government. So the idea of looking back and say, look at all these horrible things we've had, yes, that's what people say. They've lived through this. They've experienced all this, and what they're getting now is a higher cost of living, longer queues for their doctor. If they live by a river, it's filthy and they can't go near it. There's all sorts of problems with social care with their parents or their family. That's what they're experiencing. So it's all very well saying, well, there was this thing and that thing happening, but people live in the now and look to the future. They're not looking back.
I'm incredibly proud of the support that we targeted towards the people who needed it the most. We really looked after the vulnerable during COVID.
But what you haven't mentioned in all of this, Angela, is Liz Truss's budget, which caused interest rates to rocket. People are still living with the consequences of that. Mortgage interest rates are still sky high. People are having to pay rent at levels they've never had to pay before. Very conveniently leave that out of the list of things that have happened. It's been chaos. You trashed the economy, and now you're seeing the consequences of that, and you are seeing in councils across the country and in by-elections across the country that Tory voters are voting Labour, and that is what is happening.
And what I would come back and say is that we have seen the exact same circumstances right across the world. Everybody across the world has suffered from COVID.
Budget
Everyone
right across the
has had
world.
supply chain issues as they've tried to restart the economy. And we're now seeing in the US inflation ticking up and it being sticky. It is not easy to deal with these once in 100-year events. But I'm incredibly proud of what the Prime Minister has done and the Chancellor in terms of stabilising the economy over the last year and a half to get us to the point of where we are. And it is working, and we've got to stick to that, because if we don't, we will be back to square one.
But Angela, the point about this is you can argue all that, you can point at all sorts of very difficult events that happened. Nobody would deny that situations haven't been very testing. And yet what has been running alongside that is Conservatives changing Prime Ministers several times. It is the very, very dramatic turmoil of Liz Truss's short tenure in charge. And if you don't listen to the message that the electorate is giving you, aren't you risking just sticking your fingers in your ears if you don't get it, that people are trying to tell you they want you to do something different?
I listen to people on the doorsteps every week. I'm out talking to them. And it might be different in the part of the world that I represent from other parts in the country. I fully accept that. I've been quite happy to apologise to people for the chaos that we've been through for the last couple of years, because I think that's being a grown-up and being in a relationship with the people that you represent. And I think that's really important to acknowledge that things could have been handled much better. But that said, I am still incredibly supportive of what the Prime Minister has done. It's not been easy to have to wait for such a long period of time for things to stabilise, for inflation to come down, to be able to give people tax cuts. And that's what they've really wanted. They wanted to have more money in their pockets. I do acknowledge that there's been cost of living difficulties.
We've got the highest tax burden in 70 years. And Rishi Sunak is not learning from this. Liz Truss made £45 billion worth of unfunded tax cuts, which caused the economy to crash. Rishi Sunak is promising to get rid of national insurance, £46 billion, and won't say where he's going to pay for it. You know, it's going to come from pensions or the NHS. He refuses to say how he's going to pay for it. And this week, we had the suggestion that the pension age might rise to 75, which he wouldn't deny in Prime Minister's question. So they're not listening. They're just doing the same mistakes over and over
Bridget
again.
Phillipson acknowledged that national insurance isn't hypothecated towards pensions.
So where's it going to come from? Where's this £46 billion going to come from?
What the Prime Minister has said with national insurance contributions is it's the ambition to phase it out over time because double taxation on workers.
How are you going to pay for it?
Well, it's going to happen over time because
But
we'll
how are you
grow
going to
the
pay
economy.
for it? You can't say how you're going to pay for it.
But the one thing I would come back to and say that after World War II, we had huge levels of debt. It took us a long time to pay those down. What the Prime Minister has been clear about is that we are not going to make our children and our grandchildren pay for COVID. We are going to take the measures now. We're going to take the measures now. We're going to take the measures now. They're going to be hard. And we can't have everything that we want. We have to make choices to governors to choose. But it's really important that, you know, sound money, which is what Conservatives stand for. I still believe that's very much the case, regardless of what's happened over the last couple of years. And we have been demonstrating that in the last 18 months.
Chris Fox.
The last budget is predicated on unrealistic cost savings going forward. Whoever's in the next government, they're going to inherit assumed savings that have absolutely no route to actually being delivered. That's not sound government. That's a stab in the dark in order to be able to give a tax cut, which isn't a tax cut. And it was very interesting to see HMRC's figures today, which points out that the people who are really paying the most extra tax are the sort of people who live in your constituency.
OK, all three of you, thank you very much indeed for now. It is certainly true from any of the numbers that you look at that whoever wins the next election will inherit a very tough economic situation. And it might be worth remembering, I'm sure if you're up at 5:30 watching a political programme, you might remember this too, that the head of the independent government watchdog, who has a giant calculator, said that the plans that were put forward were the equivalent to fiction in terms of how much anybody might be able to count on future spending figures that were being put out into the public domain. But that is a whole debate we're going to talk about, I know, a lot when we get to the general election campaign. Let's look then at a particular aspect that we've touched on a bit tonight, what's been happening with the Lib Dems, the Greens and Reform, and the role of the smaller parties and the pattern we've seen so far. We can talk to the pollster Scarlett Maguire, who's been patiently hanging on for us. Thank you for waiting, Scarlett. It's great to have you with us. So what's the pattern telling you so far about where smaller parties have been gaining and losing?
So local elections are normally favourable to smaller parties, and that is something that we're seeing tonight. Less so, I think, for the Lib Dems at the moment. Obviously, it's still very early days, but I think there are interesting things to read. Obviously, you've just been talking a lot about the Reform by-election results and also some of the damage they've done to the Conservatives up in the northeast earlier in the night. But I think the Greens will be interesting too. Now, on Reform, I think it is important to say this was a good performance for them. You know, this beat their previous record of Wellingborough with 13%. They still got less than UKIP got in the general election in this constituency in 2015. I do think, though, the problem for the Conservatives is if they're trying to read good news into that, I don't think there's much there. I think one of the interesting things about Reform, which is slightly different from UKIP, is that they are disproportionately drawing their votes from previous Conservative 2019 voters. So more than 7 in 10 Reform voters voted Conservative in 2019, and the number for Labour is in single digits. So they are really hurting the Conservatives. So now, even if their general election polling sort of halves, which is maybe what you'd expect in line with these sorts of by-election results and local election results, they could still do an awful lot of damage. I think the Greens, on the other hand, quite interesting as well, because I think it's sort of the mirror image. Now, I don't think anyone's claiming that at the moment the Greens are doing damage to Labour as Reform are doing to the Conservatives. I'm sure people in Bristol, people in Labour Bristol, will be nervously watching that result tomorrow evening, given some of the stuff that we've been seeing earlier in the night. But I do think it's these sorts of red warning signs potentially for what the story is of the next government, of the coalition of voters that Labour has to hold together, and some of the problems they might encounter to their left flank as the Conservatives have encountered to their right.
And Scarlett, just as we talk, I'm just going to show people the state of the parties so far, with Labour adding 58 to 297 councillors, the Tories losing 118, so more than they have so far at 110. The Lib Dems gaining 15, and our viewers can see the rest there on the screen. In terms of your expectations about the Conservative performance, how would you describe it versus the reality of what we've seen at this stage?
Yeah, I think it's still early days. I think Blackpool South, I think Labour outperformed that expectation. That swing was, as you said, third biggest, absolutely huge. Also does look like that Conservatives might bottom out even their sort of low, very hyper election sort of expectation management predictions of losing 500. Looks like they could be on course to lose more. Obviously, again, still early days, but it looks like quite a dismal night.
And in terms, just also of finally, Scarlett, of the mayoral races. So we know Teesside mayoral held at the moment by Lord Ben Houchen, who was a close ally of Boris Johnson. He's expected to hang on, but West Midlands, Andy Street, who is a popular personality in his own right, used to be the boss of John Lewis, and he's fighting very hard to hang on in the West Midlands. What's your expectation of those two different races?
I think mayor elections, we've seen some polling that have shown that West Midlands in particular is going to be very tight. I think either way, it looks like it's going to be a close race. I think if the Conservatives do manage to hang on, it will be a case of the candidates performing well rather than the party. And actually, I think the flip side to this is, bearing in mind some of the results that we've seen otherwise this evening, it could be that Labour pull off a big upset in North and North Yorkshire as well, which might be more significant to read into than Andy Street or Ben Houchen holding on, as much as the Conservatives will want to draw attention to those things.
OK, Scarlett, thank you so much. It'd be great to have you on the programme, and thank you for hanging on for us at this very, very early hour of the morning. As we were just talking about the mayoral contest there, I just do want to give you a quick reminder of the chronology of all of this. As we said, at midnight, which feels like a lifetime ago now, we've got a dizzying array of contests going on. We're in the middle of a stream of council results coming through. We've had the by-election result from Blackpool South. We've had plenty of councils, but there will be many more council results being counted tomorrow on Friday. And that's when we start to get the results of those mayoral elections too. And they are fascinating and important, but also, as Scarlett was saying, sometimes a bit of an anomaly. So that result on Teesside will be tomorrow afternoon, we think. West Midlands contest probably be on Saturday afternoon, and the London mayoral result, we've hardly even touched on that, probably coming on Saturday night. So this is not a game of two halves, it's a game of, I don't know, 3/3 or 4 quarters, but we do have enough information to be able to be drawing some trends. And Rita, where are we with then maybe our final look at tonight's councils to watch, perhaps?
I think so. We started this at 11:45, didn't we? A lifetime ago, as you say. But lots has changed. Take a look at this. The ones that are flashing are the councils that have changed hands. Redditch is a Labour gain, and my goodness, I mean, that was a Conservative council where the Conservatives had a majority of 3. That's been completely overturned by Labour. They've now got a majority of 15 in Redditch Council. Rushmoor in Hampshire, that had been Conservative since the start of the century. Now Labour has that council, and they gained 7 seats there. Harlow has just come in not very long ago. That is a Conservative hold, but they've just got a majority of 1. They've just hung on to that by the skin of their teeth, and they've lost North East Lincolnshire to overall control. The Labour councils, or councils that were Labour, well, they've kept all the ones from Lincoln right the way down to Plymouth, but Oldham, that is the only council on this screen that has not yet declared, and we are hearing that Labour are in some trouble in Oldham, so we'll obviously be keeping a very close eye on Oldham. The Lib Dem councils have all stayed Lib Dem, and they'll be very relieved at that. And I think particularly at Gosport, where they had been thought to be potentially in some danger. And then under the hung councils, well, Hartlepool, we brought you a while ago, a Labour gain that they'll be very triumphant about. They are very triumphant about, and also gaining Thurrock in Essex. And in the last few moments, actually, Portsmouth is one of the last ones to have declared that has stayed hung. So the Lib Dems, who are hoping to take Portsmouth, haven't quite managed to do so. Let me show you something that shows the overall picture tonight. Those were individual councils. This is the overall picture, which based on 33 of the 35 councils that are declaring tonight, we've got enough information to work out, assuming that the patterns of voting stay the same as they have throughout the night, and there's no reason to expect them not to. This is what we think that translates into in terms of councillors. So it means that Labour will have gained 253 councillors, the Conservatives losing 516, and the Lib Dems gaining 64. So that middle figure of 516 for the Conservatives, within those sorts of, bad guesstimates that Conservatives have been talking about in the last few days. But make no mistake, it's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad, Reeta. And just as you were pointing out, that's definitely at the bottom end, if not slightly below the bottom end of expectations for the Conservatives. Labour probably roughly where we might have expected them to be. Yeah. If, as you said, those trends do continue. But it's so interesting to see that all in the context of what's happened in recent years and all those different comparisons there. A reminder, we didn't leave Liz Truss out because she was in for such a short amount of time, just because there weren't any elections when she was in Downing Street. So that's why her name is not on the chart. In terms then of what happens next, so far we are seeing the Tories have a bad night. We've been asking our Conservative ministers and representatives in the studio whether anything needs to change, and stick with the plan has, you might not be surprised, been the message. Let's hear, though, from a prominent Conservative, Tim Montgomery, who was the founding editor of Conservative Home and now does all sorts of interesting things. Tim, thank you for joining us at this early hour in the morning. What goes through your mind when you've seen these results come in?
Well, absolutely, Laura. They're definitely at the bottom end of expectations. And I think the danger is the Prime Minister has understandably been waiting for something to turn up, the hope that things would get better. But he's now been Prime Minister for 18 months, and you look at swings like in the Blackpool by-election, and the swings certainly aren't getting any better. I think the voters have made up their mind about this Prime Minister and this Conservative Party. And my concern is the longer the election is delayed, the worse the outcome is going to be. I think we're overstretching voters' patience. And I worry about that as one of the implications of tonight. So do you think then there should be an election immediately? Well, I think there needs to be something soon. And I think we do need to resolve the question of Rishi Sunak's leadership. He's a nice and decent man, but he just can't do politics. He hasn't defined Labour in any significant way. He's not able to campaign. He makes sort of announcements, waits for reaction in the opinion polls, doesn't get one, and then moves on. There isn't the sort of sustained campaign you would expect from an effective politician. I asked different people in the Conservative Party, what if the Tories won a majority, would the Conservatives do with it? And you don't have coherent answers. Rishi Sunak hasn't used the 18 months he's had as Prime Minister to show the voters that he wants to build houses, he wants to invest in vocational education. It's not really clear, other than stopping the boats, what his big message is. And that's partly the reason why the Conservative Party is, I think, in the bad place that it is. Should he go? Personally, I think the results are so bad, and although it's a big roll of the dice and it would be a gamble, I just don't think he is connected with the voters at all. I think he should go. I think Tory MPs are really waiting for the mayoral results in the West Midlands and in Teesside before they decide what sort of action they may take over the weekend. And who should replace him? Well, that's the big question. I think if David Cameron, for example, was in the Commons rather than the Lords, I think he'd be Prime Minister again by now. But the Rishi Sunak's one last advantage is that there isn't an obvious successor to him. That's the reason why up until now I don't think Conservative MPs have moved.
The problem, though, Tim, is that I think many people watching might think your problem as a party has been creating chaos in Westminster. If you change the leader, you create, well, more chaos in Westminster. Is it really credible at this stage in the electoral cycle with a general election thundering towards us to think that you can, as a party, as a cabal, change your mind again and try someone else out and expect voters to put up with that?
There are no easy options for the Conservative Party from now on, Laura, but we've just seen, in the last couple of days in Scotland, they've lurched from a real crisis with Humza Yousaf just 2 days ago to potentially uniting behind John Swinney and looking like they're much more credible at the coming general election. So it could all go wrong, a change of leader, but I think the SNP have just shown not always is the wrong option.
Tim, I'm going to put those remarks to Angela Richardson. I mean, Tim is a long-time Conservative activist. He knows and understands the party very well. He says Rishi Sunak's got to go. It's worth the roll of the dice.
Well, I think as much as I love Tim, these have been his comments for some time now, and it's sort of symptomatic of that addiction to the sugar rush that you get from the chaos, if that's where you are. I don't think it helps anyone. I don't think it helps the country. Any inward looking by Tory MPs to their own set of circumstances is not a kind thing to do to the country. It's not right and it's not fair. The Prime Minister is trying to govern for the country. I think he needs to be left to be able to get on and do the things that he's doing. Tim said he didn't see what the Prime Minister's plan was. The Prime Minister laid his plan out incredibly clearly, so clearly that people actually know what his 5 points are. That he wants to halve inflation, which he's done,
also know he hasn't
cut debt, reduce debt, cut the waiting list, grow the economy and stop the boats. And look, we are working on all of those things.
And Tim Montgomery is somebody whose views, he's always been very straightforward about his views, but colleagues of yours say to me and Chris and others privately, plenty of them, who say you are not going to be able to turn this around. And wouldn't therefore the kinder thing be to your activists, to people like Tim, to maybe people who want to vote Conservative, but they look at what's on offer and they say, we just can't do it? Wouldn't the kinder thing then be to put this out of its misery, to put this administration out of its misery?
Well, it was interesting. Tim talked about David Cameron. He's looking backwards. What we need to do is keep looking forwards and keep working on that plan to deliver for people. I just think there's a risk within the Conservative Party sometimes that it just loves having a conversation about itself.
Tim, what do you say to Angela?
Any progress for...
We can hear you now, Tim, I think.
Yeah, unfortunately, the party is still going backwards under Rishi Sunak, and I completely appreciate why Angela is so nervous about changing leadership. But when the results are as bad as they have been tonight, with so many good Conservatives losing their seats, this isn't a midterm, this is the end of the Parliament. Time is running out, and I think Rishi Sunak really hasn't used the time he's had.
What do you say to him?
I'm happy to be going out and knocking the doors in my constituency and making the case for Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister over Keir Starmer, and that is resonating with my constituents.
Doesn't look like it is, according to the results we've seen overnight.
But this is only small bits of the country on a very small turnout, and they're not being asked to choose their Prime Minister.
We've seen by-election after by-election where the swing against the Conservatives has been sustained. The idea that it's going to change now when the results have been so consistent, I think is whistling in the dark.
But those by-elections have been caused by the actions of individual MPs and they're not reflective on the Prime Minister at all.
They're not reflective of the Prime Minister? Hang on, what happens with MPs, what happens with council seats, it doesn't reflect on the Prime Minister and your party?
On the by-elections that Tim is talking about that we have had over the last few years, the vast majority of them have been caused by bad behaviour of sitting MPs.
And that's a fair point. Many MPs have gone for those kinds of reasons. But you cannot say tonight, surely, that the results you're seeing from the local elections are no reflection.
Well, I will take you back to what I said right at the beginning of the fact that when we fought these in 2021, we were in a completely different set of circumstances.
But you can say that till you're blue in the face. The results suggest very much that voters across the country are not impressed with Rishi Sunak, and we are in the run-up, the runway to a general election, thundering along.
And then I would say back to you, is this a national referendum or is it a local one? Are these local elections being fought on local issues by local people, or is it a reflection on the Prime Minister?
Well, they're local. What do you think? Are you saying these are all on local results based entirely on local issues?
Well, I think as we've seen the votes splitting out in the way that they have, you know, for the Green Party, for independents. I mean, we saw, was it Tyneside, North Tyneside, go to independents? You know, that...
Well, there were some independents. There was a bin strike in South Tyneside, and quite a lot of independents did well there. Well, local issues certainly do matter, but we'll remind you of that. And colleagues, if there are Conservative successes that they say are down to Rishi Sunak, we'll say that local issues are important as well as national ones. Tim Montgomery, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Good to have you on the election night, as always, or election morning, I should say. Rita, believe it or not, we're not that far away from 6 o'clock and a big cup of coffee, but I do want you to show us the very important breakdown of what happened under the headline in Blackpool South.
In a night of big results, this one stood out. Blackpool South, the only by-election of the night, triggered by the resignation of the Conservative MP, and it was a resounding Labour victory. Labour's Chris Webb won it with a majority of 7,600. And I just want to show you the swing from Conservative to Labour. That is a whopping 26%. And I can tell you that this was the third largest drop in Conservative support in any by-election since the war. So a really thumping victory there for the Labour Party. In terms of local council results, these are some of the most eye-catching. Redditch in the West Midlands, that was Conservative. It's a Labour gain from the Conservatives. The Conservatives had a 3-seat majority on this council, and that's been translated into a 15-seat majority for Labour. And you can see here the figures speaking for themselves. Labour gaining 10 seats, the Conservatives losing 11, and 1 seat going to the Greens. So a really interesting result there. I want to take you next to Rushmoor. Rushmoor is in Hampshire. This had been Conservative since the start of the century, and it had never been Labour, but this is also a Labour gain from the Conservatives. You can see Labour picked up 7 seats, the Conservatives lost 8 seats, and the Lib Dems gained 1. So that has become a Labour council, and Labour have a majority of 3 seats there in Rushmoor. And one more council I want to bring you, and that is Hartlepool, which had been a hung council. There was no one party in charge, and that is a Labour gain. Labour picking up 8 seats, the Conservatives losing 6, and the Independents losing 6 as well. And this was a notorious by-election, Westminster by-election defeat for Labour in 2021. So this goes quite some way for them in terms of being able to hold their heads up high again in Hartlepool. Much more on the election results. All the stories are on the website for you. You can put in your postcode and find out what's happened in your own area. That's the address. And of course, you can also use the BBC News app.
Rita, thank you very much indeed. And for all your number crunching through the night, thank you very much indeed. Worth just reminding you of a couple of other places we've been talking about through the night. Harlow Council. Labour didn't manage quite to take control of Harlow, which would have been a disappointment for them. They were working that hard. I had several visits from Keir Starmer, I think, through the campaign. But also Oldham. Now, you might remember at the beginning of the night, we were talking to our reporter on the ground there. Oldham is one of these places where Labour had some concerns about whether some voters, particularly Muslim voters, might turn away from them because of the leadership's position on Israel and Gaza. We are hearing that Labour is 2 seats down, and it does look as if, though, they are on course to lose Oldham Council. And that normally is, you know, as red can be. That's the area of the country that has Angela Rayner and other Labour MPs, but it looks like they might lose Oldham Council. We can show you the numbers so far. They're still counting, but the critical column there is the independents. Look, 13 independents have taken seats. Labour on 23. Let's look at what's changing hands. Labour have lost 3 seats and Independents have gained 4. And the Lib Dems have lost 1. And that looks like Labour might therefore have control of Oldham Council slip away from their hands. Let's then get a final end-of-term assessment from John Curtice about where the parties all are. We know that there's a lot more to come, but in terms of our time together and this first slew of results, let's take the parties in turn, John.
OK. Well, let's start with the Conservatives. I have to say I feel it's some requirement to come to Mr Sunak's defence, given the conversation you had just 5 minutes or so ago. Sure, the key message from these local ballot boxes is that Mr Sunak's project, indeed probably his principal purpose, which was to reverse the damage that he inherited, a party that was 25 points behind in the polls, that project has not made much progress, much as the opinion polls have been telling us, much as previous parliamentary by-elections before Blackpool South tonight have been telling us. But we should remember that the damage wasn't simply done by some individual MPs who are perhaps engaged in behaviour that wasn't appropriate for an MP. The principal damage was done by one Boris Johnson and his more liberal interpretation of the COVID regulations, which attracted public ire, and then the fact that he was found to have misled the House of Commons, followed by Liz Truss frightening the markets. And those are the 2 principal events that meant that Rishi Sunak, when he won the prize, won a prize that perhaps was not necessarily worth winning. And what I think we're now discovering, indeed, it's going to be very, very difficult for him indeed to turn it around. Whether somebody else could have done any better, who knows? It may well be the case, irrespective of who was the Conservative leader after Liz Truss, the electorate were not going to be willing to forget those 2 pretty significant errors, particularly at a time then the economy is struggling. For Labour, well, of course, they profit from the Conservatives' misfortune. They've probably not made much more progress than last year, but at least they've held on to where they were at last year in terms of the share of the vote. The one fly in the ointment is not just Oldham, it's in general. They were struggling in areas with large Muslim communities. But otherwise, Liberal Democrats, modest so far, going back a bit. Greens, some reason for celebration. OK,
John, thank you so much indeed. And everybody will be looking forward to your updates in the next couple of days. Brief final word to you, Angela. We've spoken a lot to you about the challenge for the Conservatives. Joe and Chris, I'm going to tempt you both. Give me one prediction each about a good result for the Lib Dems and the Labour Party.
I'll be looking at Wokingham, Tunbridge Wells and Dorset over the course of the next...
Well, that was 3. OK, and Joe?
Well, I think tonight from Hartlepool, Blackpool, Redditch down to Thurrock, we are winning in the battleground seats that we need to win in the general election, and I want to see that pattern continue over the rest of the weekend, and I think we're making good progress.
OK, and Angela, will there be a bright spot? You've had the roughest time so far tonight.
Couple of bright spots. Harlow, I think it's good to see.
OK, and Chris, final word from you.
If the results continue to be as bleak as they've been overnight for the Conservatives in the next however many hours there is between now and Sunday, where does that leave Conservative MPs contemplating the future of Rishi Sunak?
Okay.
Question mark.
Question mark, a big one. Well, the night has come to an end. In a second, we'll hand you over to our colleagues at BBC Breakfast. In these last important hours, your votes have given us plenty of signs of where public opinion is heading in this general election year. A very difficult night for the Conservatives. Pretty good one for Labour with that big swing in Blackpool South. But tons more results to come today. We'll bring you them all on the BBC as the next couple of days unfold. Thanks so much for your company. Goodbye for now.